Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know a lot of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we start, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and just relax. The Airport Runner. In the sweltering heat of June 2014, a 28-year-old German tourist named Marcus Steinberg arrived in the coastal city of Varna, Bulgaria, ready for what should have been an unforgettable summer holiday with his closest friends from university. They had planned this trip for months, poring over travel guides and online reviews, excited about the pristine Black Sea beaches, the incredibly affordable prices compared to Western Europe, and the legendary nightlife that drew young people from across the continent. Marcus was known among his friends as the quiet one of the group, the designated peacemaker who would rather buy another round of drinks than engage in any confrontation, the type of person who apologized when someone else bumped into him on the street. The first few days of their vacation unfolded exactly as they had imagined, with long lazy afternoons on the sandy beaches, evening meals of fresh seafood and local wine, and nights that stretched until dawn in the beachfront clubs. But on their fourth night in Varna, something shifted in the atmosphere when Marcus and his friends entered a crowded sports bar near the harbour district. The establishment was packed with locals watching a football match, and the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the sharp smell of rakicha, the local fruit brandy that burned your throat on the way down. What started as friendly banter between Marcus's group and some local men about the relative merits of German versus Bulgarian football teams somehow escalated into something more serious, though witnesses would later give conflicting accounts of exactly what triggered the confrontation. Some said Marcus accidentally knocked over someone's drink, others claimed it was a misunderstanding over a woman, and still others insisted it was purely about football nationalism. Whatever the catalyst, the situation deteriorated rapidly, and Marcus found himself on the receiving end of a vicious blow to the side of his head that sent him crashing into a table, shattering glasses and drawing screams from nearby patrons. The aftermath was a blur of shouting, broken glass, and Marcus's friends pulling him out of the bar while his attacker's friends held the local man back from pursuing them. At the emergency room of the local hospital, a tired-looking doctor examined Marcus and delivered news that would change everything about their carefully planned vacation. The blow had ruptured his eardrum, an injury that meant he absolutely could not fly for at least 2 weeks without risking permanent hearing damage or worse complications. His friends offered to extend their stays, to change their flights and remain with him, but Marcus insisted with unusual vehemence that they should return to Germany as scheduled. He checked himself into a modest hotel near the airport, a generic business traveler's accommodation that offered nothing more than clean sheets and proximity to his eventual departure point. What happened over the next 4 days would become one of the most puzzling disappearances in European tourism history, a case that would spawn countless theories and discussions in online forums dedicated to unexplained mysteries. The change in Marcus began almost immediately after his friends departed. He called his mother back in Hamburg multiple times per day, something completely out of character for a man who typically checked in with his family perhaps once a week. His voice on these calls was strained and urgent, though he struggled to articulate exactly what was wrong. He told her that he needed her to cancel all of his credit cards immediately, that someone was watching him, following him, that he couldn't explain everything over the phone but that she needed to trust him. When she pressed for details, he would become agitated and claim the line might be compromised. The hotel staff would later describe to investigators how Marcus's behavior became increasingly erratic with each passing day. He would pace the lobby for hours, constantly checking the windows and jumping at every sound. He refused housekeeping service, keeping the "Do Not Disturb" sign on his door permanently. When he did venture out for food, he would return within minutes, often without having purchased anything, his face pale and sweating despite the mild weather. On his third night alone, he fled the hotel at 3 in the morning, telling the confused night clerk that 4 men in dark clothing were watching his room from the parking lot, though security footage would show the lot empty except for Marcus himself. He sent his mother a text message asking about the side effects of the antibiotic he had been prescribed for his ear injury, specifically whether it could cause hallucinations or paranoid thoughts. She researched the medication frantically and replied that while rare, some people did experience psychological side effects, particularly when combined with alcohol or lack of sleep. But Marcus never responded to her message. On July 8th, the day Marcus was finally cleared to fly home, he arrived at Varna Airport for his 11:40 a.m. flight to Frankfurt. The security camera footage from that morning would later be analyzed hundreds of times by both professional investigators and amateur detectives, each viewing adding another layer of mystery rather than clarity. The footage shows Marcus entering the terminal at 9:15 a.m., walking with apparent calm through the automatic doors, his single piece of luggage rolling behind him. He approaches the check-in counter, waits in line like any other traveler, but something changes when he reaches the front of the queue. The conversation with the airline employee, which cannot be heard on the silent security footage, appears to start normally. Marcus presents his passport and ticket. The employee types something into their computer, and then Marcus takes a sudden step backward. His body language shifts dramatically from relaxed to hyper-alert. He looks over his shoulder repeatedly, scanning the crowd behind him. The employee appears to ask him something, perhaps if everything is all right, and Marcus shakes his head vigorously before backing away from the counter entirely. What happens next defies all logical explanation. Without any visible threat or pursuer, Marcus suddenly breaks into a full sprint, running faster than anyone would expect possible for someone recovering from an injury. He crashes through a group of surprised tourists, sending luggage toppling, races past security guards who are too stunned to react immediately, and bursts through the automatic exit doors with such force that one of them fails to open fully, and he shoulders through it. The last clear image of Marcus shows him running across the airport parking lot toward a construction site and a dense grove of trees beyond, his luggage abandoned, his passport and wallet left at the check-in counter, his entire existence reduced to a figure growing smaller in the distance until he disappears into the tree line. The search began within hours, with local police, airport security, and eventually German consular officials coordinating efforts to locate the missing tourist. Search dogs tracked his scent to the edge of a highway several kilometers from the airport, where the trail went cold, suggesting he might have gotten into a vehicle. But no taxi drivers reported picking up a distressed foreign man, and no private citizens came forward with information. Marcus's mother flew to Bulgaria 3 days later, desperately distributing flyers and offering a substantial reward for information. She would spend the next 2 months in Varna, checking hospitals, homeless shelters, and even morgues, but found no trace of her son. The theories about Marcus's disappearance range from the medical to the conspiratorial. Some investigators believe he experienced a psychotic break, possibly triggered by the antibiotic, the head injury, or the stress of being alone in a foreign country. Others point to his claims of being followed and suggest he might have witnessed something during the bar fight that put him in real danger, perhaps stumbling into a conflict between criminal organizations. There were reported sightings of a man matching Marcus's description in Romania, Serbia, and Turkey over the following years, but none could be confirmed. His mother maintains to this day that Marcus was not experiencing a mental health crisis, but was genuinely afraid of something or someone. She points to the fact that he was lucid enough to make travel arrangements, to communicate clearly with her in their early conversations, and to navigate the airport normally until something specific triggered his flight. The image of Marcus running across that parking lot, captured from multiple angles by different security cameras, has been viewed millions of times online, each viewer searching for some clue as to what could inspire such desperate terror in broad daylight. But the trees keep their secrets, and Marcus Steinberg has never been seen again. The stolen child. The story of Tommy Brennan begins on an unseasonably warm April day in 1912, in the small lumber town of Everwood, Louisiana, where Spanish moss hung from ancient oak trees like funeral shrouds, and the Calcasieu River wound through the landscape like an enormous serpent. 4-year-old Tommy was the youngest child of James and Margaret Brennan, Irish immigrants who had worked their way up from nothing to own a modest general store on Main Street. Tommy was their miracle child, born after 3 miscarriages, with striking blue eyes and copper-colored hair that caught the sunlight like spun gold. On that fateful Sunday, the Brennan family joined several other families from their church for a fishing expedition to Lake Shadows, a body of water that locals claimed was bottomless in certain spots, fed by underground springs that kept the water dark and cold even in the height of summer. The children played along the shoreline while the adults prepared fishing lines and unpacked picnic baskets full of fried chicken, potato salad, and sweet tea. Tommy was last seen by his mother around 2 in the afternoon, building castles in the muddy sand with 2 older children, who would later say he simply vanished when they turned their backs to gather more sticks for their construction project. The search that followed was extraordinary in its scope and desperation. Within hours, hundreds of volunteers from Everwood and surrounding communities had gathered at Lake Shadows, forming human chains to walk through the dense undergrowth, calling Tommy's name until their voices grew hoarse. The lake itself was searched by every boat that could be mustered, with men diving into the murky water again and again despite the danger of alligators and water moccasins. When conventional searching failed to produce results, the authorities made the dramatic decision to use dynamite to bring any bodies to the surface, a crude but sometimes effective method that had been employed in other drowning cases. The explosions echoed across the water like thunder, sending enormous plumes of water into the air, but Tommy's body did not surface. Margaret Brennan refused to leave the lake shore for 3 days, standing vigil in the same dress she had worn to the picnic, her eyes scanning the waterline for any sign of her son. Local women took turns standing with her, bringing her food she wouldn't eat and blankets she wouldn't use. James Brennan aged 10 years in those first few days, his hair going grey at the temples as he coordinated with law enforcement and offered increasingly large rewards for information. The entire town of Everwood seemed to hold its breath, waiting for news that never came. 8 months passed with no word of Tommy Brennan. Christmas came and went with an empty chair at the family table, and presents that remained unwrapped beneath a tree that Margaret insisted they decorate because Tommy would want them to when he came home. Then, in January of 1913, a telegram arrived at the Everwood Sheriff's Office that would reignite hope and set in motion a series of events that would haunt multiple families for generations. A boy matching Tommy's description had been found in Mississippi, traveling with a man named Samuel Carson, an itinerant carpenter and handyman who claimed the child was his nephew. Carson's story was immediately suspicious to investigators. He claimed the boy's mother, a woman named Rose Williams, had died of tuberculosis and asked him with her dying breath to care for her son, whose name was supposedly Peter. But Carson could produce no death certificate, no documentation, and no witnesses to corroborate his tale. When pressed, his story changed in small but significant ways, the kind of inconsistencies that made experienced lawmen exchange knowing glances. The boy himself, who appeared to be about the right age and had similar coloring to Tommy, seemed confused and frightened, clinging to Carson despite the man's rough demeanor. The reunion between the boy and Margaret Brennan was arranged at the sheriff's office in Everwood, with newspaper reporters crowding outside and half the town gathered in the street. When Margaret entered the room and saw the child, witnesses reported that she stopped dead in her tracks, her hand flying to her mouth. The boy showed no recognition of her whatsoever, shrinking back against the wall and refusing to meet her eyes. Margaret approached slowly, speaking softly, calling him by his pet name, mentioning his favorite toy, his beloved dog, anything that might spark recognition. Nothing worked. The sheriff suggested that perhaps the trauma of his experience had affected the boy's memory. That time with his family might restore what had been lost. Margaret seemed uncertain, studying the child's face with an intensity that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. But after several long minutes, perhaps influenced by the crowd outside expecting a joyful reunion, perhaps desperate to believe her son had been returned, she declared that yes, this was her Tommy. The crowd erupted in celebration. Carson was arrested for kidnapping, and the boy was taken home to the Brennan house. But doubt crept in almost immediately. The boy didn't remember the family dog, a gentle old hound named Rufus who had been Tommy's constant companion. He showed no recognition of Tommy's favorite blanket or the rocking horse James had carved for his 4th birthday. His mannerisms were different, his accent slightly off, and he had a scar on his shoulder that Margaret didn't remember. Still, she persisted in her claim that he was Tommy, perhaps unable to face the alternative, perhaps convinced that love and time would restore what trauma had taken. The trial of Samuel Carson became a sensation, with reporters from as far away as New Orleans covering the proceedings. But in the middle of the trial, a woman named Rose Williams arrived in Everwood, very much alive despite Carson's claim that she had died. She was a laundress from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, who had entrusted her son Peter to Carson's care while she sought work in Mobile, planning to send for him once she was settled. She had documentation proving Peter's birth, photographs of him as an infant, and witnesses who could attest to her story. The courtroom erupted in chaos as Rose Williams demanded the return of her son, while Margaret Brennan insisted the boy was Tommy. The judge ordered medical examinations, witness testimonies, and even brought in experts on child development to evaluate the situation. But in an era before DNA testing or even reliable blood typing, there was no scientific way to determine the truth. The case ultimately came down to which woman was more believable, which story more plausible, and perhaps most importantly, which outcome the all-white, all-male jury preferred. They ruled in favor of the Brennans. Rose Williams, a poor black woman with no legal representation, was dismissed as either confused or deliberately lying. The local newspaper ran editorials about how she was obviously trying to take advantage of the Brennan family's tragedy for financial gain, despite the fact that she had never asked for money and had only wanted her son returned. She left Everwood broken and defeated, returning to Mississippi with empty arms and a broken heart that would never fully heal. The boy grew up as Tommy Brennan, though whispers followed him throughout his childhood. He was a quiet, withdrawn child who never quite fit into the boisterous Brennan family dynamic. He excelled in school but made few friends, and as soon as he turned 18, he left Everwood and never returned. He married, had children of his own, and built a life far from Louisiana, occasionally sending Christmas cards but never visiting. It wasn't until 2003, long after everyone directly involved in the case had died, that Tommy's grandson, an amateur genealogist named Michael Brennan, decided to investigate the family mystery that had been whispered about at family gatherings for decades. Using modern DNA testing, he compared his own DNA with that of distant Brennan cousins and found no genetic connection whatsoever. Further investigation revealed a match with descendants of the Williams family of Mississippi. The boy who had grown up as Tommy Brennan was indeed Peter Williams, stolen from his mother and given to another family by a justice system more interested in comfortable lies than uncomfortable truths. The real Tommy Brennan was never found. Whether he drowned in lake shadows that April day, was taken by someone else entirely, or met some other fate remains unknown. His disappearance is officially unsolved, a cold case that grows colder with each passing year. Samuel Carson served 2 years in prison for kidnapping before being released, though he was almost certainly guilty of nothing more than trying to help a friend by watching her child. Rose Williams died in 1947, never having seen her son again after that day in the Everwood courthouse. The boy who became Tommy Brennan died in 1981, having lived his entire life as someone else, a stolen child raised by strangers who convinced themselves they were saving him. The wrong boy. The year 1928 was one of dramatic change in Los Angeles, with the city expanding rapidly outward into orange groves and bean fields, creating new neighborhoods almost overnight. It was in one of these newly developed areas that Christine Matthews lived with her 9-year-old son David, in a small bungalow with a front porch and a tiny yard where David kept his collection of interesting rocks and his pet turtle named Columbus. Christine worked as a telephone operator at Pacific Bell, a job that required long hours but paid enough to keep them comfortable after David's father had abandoned them 3 years earlier. On March 10th, a Saturday when Christine had been called in for an emergency shift, She gave David permission to walk the 6 blocks to the New Strand Theatre to see a Charlie Chaplin film. She pressed 2 dimes into his hand, one for the ticket and one for popcorn, and reminded him to come straight home afterward. He kissed her goodbye at 12:30 in the afternoon, wearing his favorite blue cap and practically skipping with excitement. He never made it home. Christine's shift ended at 6 p.m., and she expected to find David waiting on the front porch, probably eager to reenact scenes from the movie. Instead, she found an empty house and no sign her son had returned. She walked to the theater, questioned the ticket seller who vaguely remembered a boy matching David's description, but couldn't say when he had left or if he had been alone. As darkness fell, Christine's concern transformed into panic. She contacted the police, who initially dismissed her concerns, suggesting David had probably run off to play with friends and would return when he got hungry. But David didn't return that night, or the next, or the one after that. Christine threw herself into the search with a determination that impressed even hardened police detectives. She took leave from her job, spending her savings on private investigators and psychics, anyone who claimed they could help. She distributed thousands of flyers with David's photograph, his gap-toothed smile beaming from telephone poles and shop windows throughout Los Angeles. She gave interviews to newspapers and radio stations, becoming a familiar figure of maternal grief that captured the public's sympathy. The LAPD, under intense public pressure and facing criticism for their handling of several recent cases, assigned their best detectives to the investigation. They followed leads that took them from Los Angeles to Mexico, from San Francisco to Chicago, but each promising tip led nowhere. Months passed with no credible sightings, no ransom demands, no body discovered. The case was becoming an embarrassment for the department, a symbol of their inability to protect the city's children. Then, in August, 5 months after David's disappearance, the police received word from authorities in DeKalb, Illinois, about a boy who had been found at a diner claiming to be David Matthews from Los Angeles. The boy knew Christine's name, their address, and various details about their life that seemed to confirm his identity. The LAPD announced with great fanfare that David Matthews had been found, organizing a public reunion at the train station that would demonstrate their investigative prowess. Christine arrived at Union Station on August 20th, surrounded by reporters and photographers, her hands shaking as she waited on the platform. When the train pulled in and a small figure emerged accompanied by a detective, Christine's expression changed from hope to confusion. The boy who stood before her was similar to David in age and coloring, but his face was wrong. His ears stuck out differently. His jaw was the wrong shape. When he smiled tentatively at her, she saw teeth where David's gap should have been. She pulled the lead detective aside immediately, whispering urgently that this wasn't her son. The detective, Captain Francis Monroe, told her she was mistaken, that trauma could change a child's appearance, that she was simply overwhelmed by emotion. When she insisted, his tone became harder, suggesting that she was being hysterical, that she should be grateful her son had been returned when so many other mothers never got that chance. With dozens of reporters watching and the crowd growing restless, Christine felt she had no choice but to play along, at least temporarily. She took the boy home, but the differences became more apparent with each passing hour. This boy was 3 inches shorter than David had been. He didn't know where David kept his toys, didn't recognize David's best friend who lived next door, and seemed confused by basic details of their daily routine. When Christine had him examined by their family doctor, the physician confirmed that this child had never been circumcised, while David had been. She gathered this evidence and returned to Captain Monroe, demanding he acknowledge the mistake and resume searching for her real son. Monroe's response was as shocking as it was cruel. He accused Christine of being an unfit mother trying to abandon her son, suggested she was suffering from female hysteria, and when she persisted in her claims, he had her committed to the Los Angeles County Hospital's psychopathic ward. The newspapers, initially sympathetic to Christine, began running stories questioning her mental state. wondering if the stress of her son's disappearance had driven her to delusions. She spent 10 days in the psychiatric ward, subjected to evaluation by doctors who were clearly pressured to find her mentally incompetent. It was only when the boy himself confessed that Christine was released. His name was Billy Campbell, a 12-year-old runaway from Iowa who had been living on the streets. When police had questioned him about his identity, he had claimed to be David Matthews because he had seen the news stories and thought it would get him a train ticket to California, where he dreamed of becoming a movie star. He had memorized details from newspaper accounts, enough to fool authorities desperate to close a high-profile case. The scandal that followed led to reforms in the LAPD and several lawsuits, but it didn't bring David Matthews home. The search resumed, but the trail had gone cold. Then, in a horrible twist, authorities arrested a man named Stuart Northcott for a series of child murders at a chicken ranch in Wineville, California. Among the evidence found at his property were items that suggested David might have been one of his victims, though no body was ever definitively identified as his. Christine never stopped looking for David, maintaining hope even after Northcott's execution. She attended every trial, visited every crime scene, and followed every lead until her death in 1964. The boy who had pretended to be David was placed in foster care and eventually disappeared from public records. Captain Monroe was demoted but never formally punished for his treatment of Christine. The real David Matthews remains missing to this day, his fate unknown but almost certainly tragic, another victim of a system more concerned with appearances than truth. The woman who returned. The story of Sarah Chan begins in the summer of 2008 in the quiet mountain town of Cedar Falls, British Columbia, where the forest grows so thick that even at noon, certain trails remain shrouded in twilight. Sarah was 24 years old, a recent graduate from the University of British Columbia with a degree in environmental science, who had returned home after a difficult breakup with her longtime boyfriend. Her parents, first-generation immigrants from Taiwan, ran a small restaurant in town and had welcomed their daughter back with relief, happy to have her safe under their roof while she figured out her next steps. Sarah had always been responsible to a fault, the kind of person who called if she was going to be 5 minutes late, who kept detailed calendars and never missed an appointment. Which is why when she told her mother on the evening of August 15th that she was meeting her high school friend Jennifer at the Maple Leaf Cafe downtown, her mother thought nothing of it. Sarah left the house at 7:30 p.m., wearing light blue jeans and a grey university hoodie, her phone in her pocket, but characteristically leaving her purse behind since Jennifer always insisted on paying when they went out. The Maple Leaf Cafe was only a 15-minute walk from the Chen house, along well-lit streets that Sarah had walked hundreds of times before. But she never arrived. Jennifer waited for an hour before calling Sarah's phone, which went straight to voicemail. She then called the Chen house, assuming Sarah had forgotten or mixed up the dates. The confusion quickly turned to alarm when Sarah's parents realized their daughter had left as planned but had somehow vanished during that short walk. By 9 p.m., Sarah's father was driving the route she would have taken, while her mother called every friend and acquaintance they could think of. By 10 p.m., the police had been notified, though they initially suggested Sarah might have changed her plans, perhaps reconciled with her ex-boyfriend. But when morning came with no word, even the skeptical officers had to admit something was seriously wrong. Sarah's phone had last pinged a cell tower at 7:47 p.m., just 2 blocks from the cafe, then gone dark. The search that followed was massive and methodical. Cedar Falls was a close-knit community where everyone knew everyone, and hundreds of volunteers showed up to help. They searched every trail, every abandoned building, every creek and ravine. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police brought in dogs, helicopters, and even thermal imaging equipment. Posters with Sarah's smiling face appeared on every surface in town and throughout British Columbia. Her parents spent their life savings on private investigators and psychics, anyone who might provide a clue. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The leaves changed from green to gold to gone, and snow began to dust the mountains. Christmas passed with an empty chair at the Chan family table. Sarah's mother kept her daughter's room exactly as she had left it. The bed made, a library book still on the nightstand with a bookmark at page 247. The official search was scaled back, then called off entirely, though volunteers continued to look on weekends, refusing to give up hope. Then, on July 5, 2009, nearly 11 months after her disappearance, something extraordinary happened. At 3:47 a.m., a night nurse at Cedar Falls General Hospital was startled to find a woman standing in the emergency room entrance. The woman was thin, barefoot, and wearing clothes that didn't fit properly, a men's flannel shirt and jeans that were too long. Her hair was matted and her skin was sunburned, but it was her eyes that the nurse would never forget, vacant and unfocused, as if she was looking at something very far away. When asked for her name, the woman didn't speak but slowly wrote Sarah Chen on the intake form in shaky letters. The nurse, who had seen the missing posters for months, immediately called security and the police. Fingerprint confirmation proved what seemed impossible. This was indeed Sarah Chen, missing for nearly a year, standing in the hospital as if she had materialized out of thin air. Sarah's parents rushed to the hospital, their joy at their daughter's return quickly tempered by concern at her condition. Sarah was severely dehydrated and malnourished, having lost nearly 30 pounds. Her feet were cut and calloused as if she had been walking on rough ground for extended periods. But medical examinations revealed no signs of physical abuse, no broken bones, no evidence of long-term restraint. Toxicology screens came back clean, except for trace amounts of common antibiotics. Brain scans showed no trauma or abnormalities that would explain her condition. But the most unsettling aspect was Sarah's mental state. She recognized her parents but didn't embrace them, acknowledged her name but seemed confused by questions about where she had been. When pressed, she would only repeat a few phrases. "I was in the dark place. It was safe, but it wasn't me. They said I could go when I was ready." When asked who they were, she would shake her head and stop talking entirely. Over the following days, investigators tried everything to piece together what had happened. They showed Sarah maps, hoping she could indicate where she had been. They brought in specialized trauma counselors, experts in recovered memory, even hypnotists with her parents' permission. But Sarah either couldn't or wouldn't provide coherent information about her missing months. She would sometimes mention trees that watched, paths that changed, and voices that spoke without words, but these fragments made no logical sense. The clothes Sarah was wearing when she returned provided few clues. They were generic brands that could have been purchased anywhere, with no identifying marks or labels. The only unusual detail was that they smelled strongly of pine resin and something else, a chemical odor that forensic analysts couldn't identify. Her hair contained traces of unusual pollen that didn't match any known plants in the British Columbia region, a detail that was never released to the public. After a week of observation, Sarah was released to her parents' care. She moved back into her childhood room, but she was fundamentally changed. She would stand at windows for hours, watching the tree line. She refused to go out after dark and became agitated when anyone suggested walking near the forest. She deleted all her social media accounts, destroyed her photos, and asked her parents to tell anyone who asked that she didn't want to discuss what had happened. Within 6 months, Sarah had legally changed her name and moved to another province. Her parents sold their restaurant and followed her, the family essentially disappearing from Cedar Falls as completely as Sarah had vanished that August night. The police officially closed the case, marking it as resolved, though no explanation was ever provided for where Sarah had been or what had happened to her. The only public statement Sarah ever made came through a lawyer 3 months after her return. It read simply, "I am grateful to be home. I ask for privacy as I recover. Please respect my wish not to discuss my experience." But there was one detail that haunted those who had been involved in her case. On her last day in the hospital, A nurse who had grown close to Sarah asked her if she was glad to be back. Sarah looked at her for a long moment before whispering, "I'm back, but I'm not the only one who came back. We're all here now, waiting." The nurse asked what she meant, but Sarah had already turned away, staring out the window at the dark line of trees that bordered the hospital parking lot, her reflection in the glass looking like a stranger wearing Sarah Chen's face. The boy who knew too much. October in Santa Rosa, California brings a particular kind of beauty, with golden hills and perfect temperatures that make the wine country shimmer like a postcard. It was on such an afternoon in 2017 that 15-year-old Michael Rodriguez said goodbye to his friends at Riverside High School and began his usual walk home through the suburban streets of his neighborhood. Michael was a sophomore, a solid B student who played junior varsity soccer and had recently started learning guitar. He lived with his mother Elena and younger sister in a modest ranch house about a mile from school, a walk he had made hundreds of times without incident. The route was straightforward, down Mendocino Avenue, left on 7th Street, through Jacobs Park, and then 3 more blocks to home. Security cameras from various businesses showed Michael at several points along his journey, everything appearing normal. He stopped at a convenience store to buy a Gatorade, exchanged a few words with a clerk who knew him as a regular customer, then continued on his way. The last confirmed sighting was at 3:47 p.m., captured by a traffic camera as he entered Jacobs Park. He should have emerged on the other side 3 minutes later. He never did. Elena Rodriguez started worrying when Michael hadn't arrived home by 5 p.m. He always texted if he was going to a friend's house or staying after school. She called his phone repeatedly, each call going straight to voicemail. By 6 p.m., she was at the school, confirming with security that he had left at the normal time. By 7 p.m., the police were involved, and by 8 p.m., the first search teams were sweeping through Jacobs Park with flashlights as darkness fell. The investigation revealed troubling details almost immediately. Michael's backpack was discovered the next morning behind a dumpster in an alley 2 blocks from his usual route. His phone was missing, but his laptop was still in the backpack, along with his homework and textbooks. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no torn clothing. It was as if Michael had carefully placed the backpack there himself before walking away. When detectives interviewed Michael's friends and classmates, a disturbing pattern emerged. In the 2 weeks before his disappearance, Michael had become increasingly paranoid and withdrawn. He had asked multiple friends if they had noticed anyone following him, specifically mentioning a man in a red jacket who seemed to appear wherever he went. He had started taking different routes home, sometimes doubling back or suddenly changing direction. One friend reported that Michael had asked him how to tell if your phone was being tracked and whether someone could listen to your conversations even when the phone was turned off. His mother confirmed that Michael had been acting strangely at home as well. He had moved his bed away from the window, started checking the locks obsessively, and would sometimes stare out the window for long periods, claiming he thought he saw someone in the backyard. Elena had attributed this to typical teenage anxiety, perhaps stress from school or girl troubles. She had even made an appointment with a counselor that Michael was supposed to attend the week after he vanished. The search for Michael expanded rapidly. The FBI was brought in due to the possibility of abduction. Thousands of volunteers combed through Santa Rosa and surrounding areas. Michael's photo appeared on billboards along Highway 101, and his case was featured on national news programs. His mother made tearful pleas for his return, promising that whatever trouble he might be in, they could work it out together. For 5 months, there was nothing. No credible sightings, no activity on his social media accounts, no use of his ATM card. The case was beginning to go cold when, on March 18, 2018, a 911 call came in from a payphone at a rest stop outside of Willits, California, about 60 miles north of Santa Rosa. The caller, barely audible, said only, My name is Michael Rodriguez. I'm at the Willets rest stop. Please help me." Then the line went dead. When California Highway Patrol arrived 12 minutes later, they found Michael sitting on a bench near the payphone, staring straight ahead with his hands folded in his lap. He was wearing clothes that weren't his, jeans and a t-shirt that were both too large, and generic white sneakers with no laces. His hair had grown long and unkempt, and he had lost significant weight, but he was physically unharmed. In his hands, he clutched a composition notebook, the kind students use in school, though every page was blank except for strange symbols and patterns that looked almost like a code or an unknown language. Michael was transported to a hospital in Santa Rosa, where he was reunited with his mother and sister. The reunion was emotional, but strange. Michael recognized them, embraced them, but seemed distant, as if part of him was still elsewhere. For the first 24 hours, he didn't speak at all, just nodded or shook his head in response to questions. When he finally did begin to talk, what he said made little sense to investigators. He claimed he had been taken by a group, though he couldn't or wouldn't describe their faces, saying that trying to remember what they looked like made his head hurt. He said they kept him in a place without windows, where it was always the same temperature and the lights never turned off completely. He talked about tests, though he couldn't explain what kind, and mentioned other voices, other young people perhaps, though he never saw them. When asked how he escaped, Michael's answer sent chills through everyone who heard it. He said he didn't escape, that they had simply decided he could leave, that he had passed whatever test they had been conducting. The notebook Michael had been carrying became a focal point of the investigation. FBI cryptographers analyzed the symbols, finding patterns that suggested they might be a form of communication, but nothing that matched any known language or code. Michael himself claimed he didn't remember writing them, that sometimes his hand would just move on its own and these patterns would appear. He seemed as puzzled by them as everyone else, staring at the pages as if they might suddenly make sense. Physical examination revealed no signs of long-term restraint or abuse. There were no injection marks suggesting drugs, no scars or injuries except for minor scratches on his feet consistent with walking on rough ground. Blood tests showed normal levels of all standard markers, though there were trace amounts of an unidentified compound that didn't match any known pharmaceutical or recreational drug. His brain scans were normal, his reflexes intact, his memory seemingly functional except for the gaps surrounding his captivity. But Michael was changed in ways that went beyond the physical. He would sometimes stop mid-sentence and cock his head as if listening to something only he could hear. He developed an aversion to electronic devices, claiming they made a high-pitched sound that hurt his ears. He could no longer sleep in complete darkness, requiring a light on at all times, but also couldn't tolerate bright lights, living in a constant state of dim illumination that seemed to be the only thing that brought him comfort. Most disturbing were the things Michael said when he thought no one was listening. His mother reported hearing him having conversations in his room, though he was alone. When she asked who he was talking to, he would say he was just thinking out loud, but she could swear she sometimes heard him pause as if listening to responses. His sister found him one night standing in the backyard at 3 a.m., looking up at the stars. When she asked what he was doing, he replied, "Checking if they're still watching." They said they would always be watching. The investigation into Michael's disappearance continued even after his return, but no solid leads ever materialized. The red-jacketed man Michael had feared before his disappearance was never identified or located. No witnesses came forward claiming to have seen Michael during his missing months. The location where he claimed to have been held was never found, despite extensive searches based on his limited descriptions. The case was officially closed as a voluntary missing person who had returned, though everyone involved knew that classification was woefully inadequate. 3 months after his return, Michael gave one final interview to investigators before his family requested that all contact cease. In that interview, he made a statement that would haunt those who heard it. He said, "I wasn't the first one they took, and I won't be the last. There are others still there, still being tested. Some pass, some don't. I don't know what happens to the ones who don't pass. But I know they're looking for something specific, something in certain people. And when they find enough of us, something's going to happen. I can feel it coming, like pressure before a storm." When pressed for more details, Michael began drawing more symbols in his notebook, faster and faster, his hand moving almost mechanically across the page. The symbols seemed to form patterns, almost like a map or a diagram, but of what, no one could determine. After 20 minutes of this frantic drawing, Michael suddenly stopped, looked up at the investigators with tears streaming down his face, and whispered, "They won't let me tell you. Even now, they won't let me tell you." The Rodriguez family left Santa Rosa 6 months after Michael's return. They sold their house at a loss, packed only essential belongings, and disappeared without forwarding addresses. Friends and relatives reported receiving occasional generic holiday cards with no return address, always postmarked from different states. Michael's case file remains open but inactive, a mystery that provided more questions than answers. A story of a boy who came back from somewhere carrying secrets he either couldn't or wasn't allowed to share. The Mountain Road Mystery. February in New Hampshire can be brutally cold, with temperatures that turn breath into ice crystals and make the forests feel like alien landscapes draped in white silence. It was on such a night, February 9, 2004, that 21-year-old Jessica Sullivan disappeared on Route 112, a winding mountain road that cuts through the White Mountain National Forest. Her case would become one of the most analyzed and debated disappearances in American history, spawning countless theories, documentaries, and online communities dedicated to solving the mystery of what happened in those crucial minutes after her car accident. Jessica was a nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, known for her dedication to her studies and her caring nature that made her perfect for her chosen profession. She was also known for being responsible and level-headed, which made the events of February 9th all the more puzzling. That morning, Jessica had sent emails to her professors claiming there had been a death in her family, and she would need to miss a few days of classes. But this was a lie. No one in Jessica's family had died, and no one knew she was planning to leave campus. What investigators would later piece together was that Jessica had been going through a difficult period. She had recently ended a long-term relationship, had been caught using a stolen credit card to buy pizza, though the theft charges were later dropped, and had crashed her father's new car into a guardrail, causing thousands of dollars in damage. Friends described her as stressed and overwhelmed, but not suicidal or irrational. The nursing program was demanding, and Jessica was known to be a perfectionist who took failures particularly hard. On the afternoon of February 9th, Jessica packed several bags, including clothes, textbooks, and toiletries, suggesting she planned to be gone for more than just a day or two. She stopped at an ATM and withdrew almost all of her money, about $280. She then stopped at a liquor store where she purchased a bottle of Kahlua, a box of wine, and a bottle of vodka. Security footage showed her appearing calm and normal during these transactions. She then drove north, alone, into the mountains of New Hampshire. At approximately 7:27 p.m., a local resident named Faith Morrison called 911 to report a car accident on Route 112 near the Weathered Barn Corner, a sharp turn known for catching drivers off guard, especially in winter conditions. When she looked out her window, she saw a black satin sedan facing the wrong direction, its front end damaged from impact with a snowbank. The airbags had deployed, and the windshield was cracked in a spider web pattern from the impact. Within minutes of the 911 call, a local school bus driver named Robert Chen, returning from his route, came upon the accident scene. He would later become the last person known to have spoken with Jessica Sullivan. Chen stopped his bus and approached the Saturn, where he found Jessica alone, seemingly uninjured but shaken. He asked if she was hurt and if she needed him to call the police. Jessica assured him she was fine, that she had already called AAA on her cell phone, and asked him not to call the police. Chen was immediately suspicious of this claim because he knew cell phone reception was virtually non-existent in that particular stretch of road, something any local would know. He also noticed that while Jessica seemed coherent, there was a strong smell of alcohol, and what looked like wine splashed on the interior of the car. Despite Jessica's protests, Chan told her he would call the police from his house just up the road, wanting to ensure she got help on the cold night. This brief interaction lasted no more than 3 to 4 minutes. When police arrived at the scene at 7:46 p.m., just 19 minutes after the initial 911 call, Jessica Sullivan was gone. Her car was locked, with the keys missing. Her purse, wallet, and cell phone were left behind, along with most of the alcohol she had purchased, though the bottle of vodka was missing. There were no footprints leading into the woods, though the road had been sanded earlier that day, which would have obscured tracks. A search of the immediate area found nothing. What followed was one of the most extensive searches in New Hampshire history. State police, local volunteers, and eventually the FBI combed through miles of frozen forest. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew over the area repeatedly. Search dogs were brought in, including specialized cadaver dogs, but they found no trace of Jessica beyond a few hundred yards from her car, where her scent seemed to simply vanish. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air on a dark mountain road. The investigation revealed puzzling details that only deepened the mystery. Jessica had searched online for directions to the Berkshire Mountains and Burlington, Vermont, in the days before her disappearance, but she had driven to neither location. She had also searched for information about alcohol's effect on the body and how to deal with relationship problems. Her dorm room was found packed up in boxes, as if she was planning to move out, though she hadn't mentioned this to anyone. In the days after her disappearance, there were several reported sightings of Jessica. A witness claimed to have seen her 4 miles from the accident site that night, looking distressed and hurrying along the road. Another reported seeing her at a church in a nearby town the next morning. But none of these sightings could be confirmed, and as days turned to weeks, hope of finding Jessica alive dwindled. The theories about what happened to Jessica Sullivan range from the mundane to the bizarre. Some believe she suffered a head injury in the crash, became disoriented, and wandered into the woods where she succumbed to the cold. Others think she was picked up by someone, either a good Samaritan or someone with darker intentions, and met with foul play. There are those who believe Jessica staged her own disappearance, that the accident provided an unexpected opportunity to start a new life somewhere else. But there are darker theories as well. Some investigators noted that Route 112 had been the site of several other mysterious disappearances over the years, leading to speculation about a possible serial predator operating in the area. The fact that Jessica's scent abruptly ended suggested she might have gotten into a vehicle, but no one ever came forward claiming to have given her a ride. The precision of the timing, with Jessica vanishing in the brief window between Chen leaving and police arriving, suggested either incredible luck or careful planning. Jessica's father, who became obsessed with finding his daughter, spent years searching the mountains himself, following every lead and theory. He discovered that a house near the accident site had been unoccupied that night, but showed signs of forced entry discovered days later, though police found no evidence connecting it to Jessica. He also learned that a man with a history of sexual assault had been working in the area that week, though he had an alibi for the night in question. The most chilling detail emerged years later when a former police officer revealed that on the night of Jessica's disappearance, he had heard radio chatter about a young woman being taken into custody, though no such arrest was ever officially recorded. When pressed, the department claimed it must have been a miscommunication, but the officer remained convinced he had heard correctly. This led to theories of police involvement or cover-up, though no evidence ever supported these claims. Today, nearly 2 decades later, Jessica Sullivan, remains missing. Her car was eventually released to her family and sits in her father's garage, a haunting reminder of that February night. The items she left behind have been analyzed countless times, her online history scrutinized, her relationships examined and re-examined. Yet no one can explain how a young woman vanished from a mountain road in less than 19 minutes, leaving behind everything but herself and a bottle of vodka. The stretch of Route 112 where Jessica disappeared is still traveled daily by locals and tourists alike, most unaware of the mystery that unfolded there. But for those who know the story, that bend in the road near the weathered barn corner carries an undeniable chill, a reminder that sometimes people simply vanish, leaving behind only questions that may never be answered. The Arctic Shadow. The town of Nome, Alaska sits at the edge of the world, a small cluster of buildings clinging to the coast of the Bering Sea, where the land meets ice and the horizon seems to stretch into infinity. With a population of less than 4,000, it's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the extreme isolation creates bonds of necessity among neighbors who might be the only help available when temperatures drop to 40 below and the darkness of winter lasts for months. It was in this unforgiving landscape that Thomas Anderson, a 37-year-old electrical contractor, became part of one of Alaska's most unsettling patterns of disappearances. Thomas had moved to Nome from Minnesota 5 years earlier, drawn by the good pay for skilled workers and what he called the last frontier's freedom. He was a quiet man who kept to himself, but was respected for his work ethic and reliability. He lived alone in a small cabin 3 miles outside of town, near the tree line where the sparse forest met the tundra. It wasn't unusual in Nome for people to choose isolation, as many residents had come to Alaska specifically to escape the crowds and complications of the lower 48. What made Thomas's disappearance particularly disturbing was that he wasn't the first, or the 5th, or even the 10th person to vanish from Nome under mysterious circumstances. In the decade before Thomas disappeared in November 2004, 24 people had gone missing from Nome and the surrounding area. Some were Alaska natives, some were white, some were young, others old. There was no clear pattern except for the disappearances themselves, and the fact that none of the missing were ever found, alive or dead. November 13, 2004, started like any other day for Thomas. He reported to a job site in town at 7 a.m., working on the electrical system for a new medical clinic. His co-workers remembered nothing unusual about his behavior that day. He ate lunch with them, made plans to help with another project the following week, and left the site at 4:30 p.m. as darkness was already falling, the brief Arctic daylight having come and gone. His truck was seen at the general store where he bought groceries and a case of beer. The clerk who rang him up said Thomas seemed normal, maybe a little tired, but nothing concerning. Thomas's boss became worried when he didn't show up for work on November 15th. Thomas had never missed a day without calling, and with a big project deadline approaching, his absence was particularly notable. The boss drove to Thomas's cabin that evening, finding his truck parked in its usual spot, covered with 2 days' worth of light snow. The cabin's lights were off, unusual for the early evening hours. When he knocked and received no answer, he tried the door and found it unlocked, which wasn't uncommon in rural Alaska, where many people didn't bother with locks. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed. Thomas's wallet and keys were on the kitchen table next to his cell phone. A pot of coffee sat on the counter, full but cold, as if it had been made but never drunk. His winter coat hung on its hook by the door, his boots sitting beneath it. The bed was neatly made with military precision, the way Thomas always kept it, having served in the army years before. The only thing missing was Thomas himself. The search began immediately, which in Nome meant something different than it would in most places. The darkness, the cold, and the vast emptiness of the landscape made searching both dangerous and often futile. Still, volunteers with snowmobiles, dog teams, and eventually helicopters with thermal imaging covered hundreds of square miles. They found no tracks leading away from the cabin, though fresh snow could have covered them. The dogs picked up Thomas's scent briefly, but lost it just yards from his back door, as if he had simply vanished into the Arctic air. As investigators dug into Thomas's disappearance, they began to notice disturbing parallels with the other missing persons cases from Nome. Many had vanished from their homes, leaving behind essential items like coats and boots that no one would venture outside without in an Alaskan winter. Several had left behind food in various states of preparation, as if they had been interrupted. None had mentioned plans to leave, and none had taken money or vehicles when those were available. The FBI was eventually brought in to investigate what they termed the Nome Census Area Missing Persons Cluster. Their investigation revealed even more unsettling details. In several cases, witnesses had reported seeing strange lights in the sky around the time of disappearances. Others had reported feeling watched in the days before they vanished, though they couldn't say by whom or what. Some of the missing had reported vivid nightmares or sleep disturbances in the weeks before their disappearances, though this was often attributed to the psychological effects of the long Arctic nights. 2 days after Thomas vanished, something happened that was kept out of the public reports for years. A hunter named David Tall Bear, tracking caribou 30 miles north of Nome, found something unusual partially buried in the snow along a game trail. It was a wool sock, the kind Thomas was known to wear, frozen solid and torn as if it had been removed forcefully. Near it, protected from the wind by a rock formation, was something even stranger, a Polaroid photograph, old and weathered, showing Thomas's cabin from a distance. The photo appeared to have been taken from the forest line, and in the cabin's window, barely visible, was a pale face that didn't appear to be Thomas. When investigators examined the photo under magnification, what they found defied easy explanation. The face in the window seemed distorted, elongated somehow, with eyes that reflected the camera flash in a way that didn't seem quite right. The timestamp on the photo's border was smudged, but appeared to show a date from 1987, 17 years before Thomas had even moved to Alaska. How a photo of his cabin could exist from before he lived there, and who or what was in that window, became questions that haunted the investigation. Local Alaska natives, when pressed, spoke reluctantly of old stories, legends that predated white settlement by centuries. They talked of the Tornasuk, shadow beings that lived at the edge of the world, things that looked like men but weren't, that could take people to the dark places between the stars. Most investigators dismissed these as folklore, but some noted that the descriptions of these beings matched disturbing details from witness accounts. Tall, pale figures seen at the edges of vision, shadows that moved independently of their sources, and the feeling of being watched by something fundamentally not human. The search for Thomas continued for weeks, expanding to cover hundreds of square miles despite the brutal conditions. Search teams reported equipment failures that couldn't be explained, compasses that spun wildly, GPS units that gave impossible readings. Several searchers reported experiencing missing time, arriving back at base hours later than they should have with no memory of the delay. One search dog handler found his entire team of dogs cowering and refusing to enter a particular valley, though there was nothing visible that should have frightened them. As winter deepened and hope of finding Thomas alive disappeared, the investigation shifted to trying to understand what had happened. Analysis of his phone records showed several calls to numbers that didn't exist, appearing on his bill but corresponding to no registered phone lines. His computer showed searches for terms like missing time, shadow people, and how to know if you're being watched, all dated to the week before his disappearance. The most disturbing discovery came from Thomas's nearest neighbor, an elderly Inupiaq woman named Mary Tikiak, who lived 2 miles away. She told investigators that on the night Thomas disappeared, she had seen lights in the sky above his cabin. Not the aurora borealis she knew well, but something else, something that moved with purpose and made no sound. She said she had locked her doors and windows, something she had never done in 40 years of living there, and prayed until morning. When asked why she hadn't reported this earlier, she simply said, "Some things, it's better not to speak of them. Speaking of them sometimes brings them back." Today, Thomas Anderson remains missing. one of over 40 people who have vanished from Nome and the surrounding area over the past 3 decades. His cabin still stands empty, as no one will buy or rent it. Locals say that on certain nights, when the aurora is quiet and the moon is dark, you can see lights moving through the windows, though the power has been disconnected for years. The photograph found by David Tallbear was eventually filed away in FBI archives, deemed too damaged and unclear to be useful as evidence, though some who saw it claimed it gave them nightmares for months afterward. The disappearances in Nome continue sporadically. Every few years, someone else vanishes under similar circumstances, leaving behind the hallmarks that have become grimly familiar. Essential items abandoned, no signs of struggle, and that peculiar way the search dogs always lose the scent just yards from where the person was last seen. The FBI maintains that the disappearances are likely due to the harsh environment, mental health issues exacerbated by isolation and darkness, or voluntary disappearances. But those who live in Nome know better. They know that sometimes, in the deep Arctic night, people simply vanish, taken by something that has always been there, waiting at the edge of the world where the maps run out and the darkness begins. The lighthouse keeper's daughter. The Beacon Point Lighthouse stood on a jagged outcrop of rock off the coast of Maine, accessible only by a narrow causeway that disappeared completely during high tide, leaving the lighthouse and its keeper's cottage isolated from the mainland for hours at a time. It was here that 52-year-old Robert Henley had served as lighthouse keeper for 15 years, maintaining the automated beacon and living a quiet, solitary life, with only his 17-year-old daughter Emma for company, since his wife had died of cancer 3 years earlier. Emma Henley was known in the nearby town of Rockport as a bright, artistic girl who painted seascapes and helped her father with his duties, though she admitted to friends that she sometimes felt trapped on that rocky island, surrounded by nothing but the endless grey Atlantic and the cries of seabirds. She had been accepted to art school in Boston, and was counting down the days until September when she could finally leave the lighthouse behind. But on the morning of April 23, 2019, Emma Henley vanished from Beacon Point, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt the Maine coast for years to come. The disappearance was discovered when Emma's best friend, Jessica Park, arrived at the causeway at low tide for a planned shopping trip to Portland. She found Robert Henley standing at the edge of the rocks, staring out at the ocean with an expression she would later describe as completely blank, as if his mind had simply switched off. When Jessica called out to him, asking where Emma was, Robert turned to look at her with no recognition in his eyes. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out, just a low, mournful sound that Jessica said sounded more like whale song than anything human. The police arrived within an hour, bringing paramedics who examined Robert and found him in a state of complete catatonia. He was responsive to physical stimuli, but seemed unable or unwilling to speak, communicate, or even acknowledge the presence of others beyond that strange, hollow stare. A search of the lighthouse revealed Emma's room exactly as it might appear on any normal morning, her bed neatly made, her paintings lining the walls, her clothes in the closet. But Emma herself was nowhere to be found. The investigation uncovered deeply disturbing details. Emma's diary, discovered hidden beneath her mattress, revealed that in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she had been experiencing strange dreams and visions. She wrote about seeing lights beneath the water at night, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. She described hearing voices calling her name from the ocean, voices that sounded like her dead mother, but wrong somehow, as if something was wearing her mother's voice like an ill-fitting mask. Most disturbing was an entry from 3 days before she vanished where she wrote, "Dad's been sleepwalking again. Last night I found him standing at my door, just watching me. When I asked what he was doing, he said, 'They're coming to collect what was promised.' He doesn't remember any of it in the morning." Security footage from the lighthouse's single camera, installed to monitor the equipment room, showed something that defied explanation. At 3:33 a.m. on the night Emma disappeared, the camera captured her walking past, fully dressed despite the early hour. She appeared calm, almost serene, moving with an unusual fluidity that several investigators noted seemed almost like she was floating rather than walking. 30 seconds later, Robert appeared in frame, following his daughter, his eyes completely white as if rolled back in his head. Then the footage cut to static for exactly 13 minutes. When it resumed, both Emma and Robert were gone, and the equipment room door, which had been closed, stood wide open, revealing only darkness beyond. A search of Robert's personal effects revealed a collection of journals dating back 20 years, long before he had become lighthouse keeper. The entries began normally enough, documenting his daily life and work as a fisherman. But after his first visit to Beacon Point Lighthouse in 1999, the tone changed dramatically. He wrote about dreams of ancient cities beneath the waves, of things that had lived in the deep places since before humans walked upright. He documented an increasing obsession with maritime folklore, specifically tales of bargains made with sea entities for safe passage or bountiful catches. The most chilling discovery was an entry from 2002, shortly after Emma was born, where Robert wrote, "The terms are set. 17 years of calm seas and full nets. 17 years to love her. Then she returns to where she came from. Margaret doesn't know. She can never know. But Emma isn't entirely ours. She never was. She belongs to the deep, and the deep always collects its debts." Local fishermen, when pressed, admitted they had always found Robert strange, especially after he took the lighthouse keeper position. They spoke of seeing him on the rocks at low tide, speaking to the water in a language none of them recognized. Several reported that Robert's fishing nets, back when he still fished, always came up full even when everyone else's were empty, and that sometimes his catch included species that shouldn't exist in main waters, deep-sea fish with too many eyes or arrangements of fins that hurt to look at directly. The search for Emma continued for weeks. Divers explored the waters around Beacon Point, finding a series of underwater caves that hadn't appeared on any maritime charts. In one cave, they discovered what appeared to be drawings carved into the rock, symbols that resembled those found in Emma's diary, patterns that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. One diver reported seeing what he thought was a person deep in the cave system, but when he approached, he realized the proportions were all wrong, the limbs too long, the movement too fluid to be human. The dive team refused to return after that day. 3 months after Emma's disappearance, a fishing vessel 30 miles off the coast reported an unusual sighting. They claimed to have seen a young woman floating in the water, not swimming but standing upright as if on solid ground. When they moved to rescue her, she turned to look at them, and the captain swore it was Emma Henley. But her eyes, he said, were completely black, and when she smiled, he saw rows of teeth like a shark's. She then sank beneath the surface without a ripple, and though they searched for hours, they found no further trace. Robert Henley never recovered his ability to speak. He was institutionalized in a psychiatric facility in Augusta, where he spent his days drawing the same pattern over and over, a spiral that seemed to have no end. Nurses reported that he became agitated during full moons and extremely distressed during storms, often being found at his window, pressing his hands against the glass and making that same whale song sound he had made the day Emma disappeared. He died 2 years later, and the attending physician noted that despite being nowhere near the ocean, Robert's lungs were full of salt water. The Beacon Point Lighthouse was decommissioned shortly after Emma's disappearance. The building still stands, empty and deteriorating, avoided by locals and tourists alike. Those who have ventured inside report hearing voices in the walls, seeing wet footprints that appear and disappear, and feeling an overwhelming compulsion to walk into the sea. On certain foggy nights, fishermen passing by claim they can see a light in Emma's old room, and sometimes, if the wind is just right, they hear a young woman's voice singing a song in a language that predates human memory, calling sailors to join her in the deep places where the sun never reaches and strange bargains are made in the dark. The subway platform. The New York City subway system is a labyrinth of tunnels, platforms, and forgotten spaces that sprawl beneath the city like the root system of some massive concrete tree. Most New Yorkers use it daily without thinking about the miles of darkness just beyond the platform lights, the abandoned stations, the maintenance tunnels, and the places where the city's underground infrastructure intersects in ways that aren't on any public maps. It was into this subterranean world that 28-year-old Marcus Webb disappeared on a rainy Thursday evening in October 2021, an incident that would have been dismissed as just another tragic accident if not for what was captured on security cameras. Marcus was a software developer who lived in Brooklyn and commuted to his office in Manhattan every day on the Q train. His co-workers described him as brilliant but increasingly paranoid in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. He had started taking different routes to work, doubling back on platforms, and constantly checking over his shoulder. When asked about his behavior, he mentioned that he felt like he was being followed, but not by a person, by something that moved wrong, stayed just outside his peripheral vision, and made the air feel thick and electric like before a thunderstorm. On October 14th, Marcus left his office at 6:47 p.m., badging out of the building and walking to the Canal Street station. Security footage showed him entering the station at 7:03 p.m., passing through the turnstile with his Metro card, and descending to the platform. The platform was moderately crowded with the usual evening commuters, everyone focused on their phones or staring blankly ahead, practiced in the art of urban isolation. Marcus stood near the middle of the platform, occasionally glancing down the tunnel for the approaching train. What happened next was captured by multiple cameras from different angles, and the footage has been analyzed hundreds of times by investigators, experts, and amateur detectives online. At 7:11 p.m., Marcus suddenly looked up from his phone, his entire body going rigid. He turned his head slowly to look at something off-camera, his expression changing from confusion to terror in a matter of seconds. Other commuters around him seemed oblivious to whatever had caught his attention, continuing their wait without reaction. Marcus began backing away from whatever he was seeing, moving toward the edge of the platform. His mouth was moving as if he was speaking or perhaps screaming, but in the silent security footage, there was no way to know what he was saying. Then, at 7:12 p.m., Marcus turned and ran. But he didn't run toward the exit or along the platform. Instead, he jumped down onto the tracks and ran into the tunnel, disappearing into the darkness between stations. The reaction from other commuters was immediate panic. Several people called 911, the station was evacuated, and train service was suspended while transit police searched for Marcus. They followed his path into the tunnel, expecting to find him injured or worse a few hundred feet in. But Marcus had vanished. The search expanded to include the entire stretch of tunnel between Canal Street and Union Square, then to adjacent tunnels and maintenance areas. Search teams found no sign of Marcus Webb, no clothing, no blood, no indication of where he had gone. The investigation revealed troubling details about the moments before Marcus's disappearance. Enhanced analysis of the security footage showed a shadow on the platform that didn't correspond to any visible person or object. The shadow appeared to move independently, growing and shrinking in ways that defied the fixed lighting of the station. In one frame, the shadow seemed to extend toward Marcus just before he reacted, like a dark hand reaching out from nowhere. Other commuters from that evening were interviewed, and while most claimed to have seen nothing unusual, 3 separate witnesses described feeling an overwhelming sense of dread just before Marcus ran. One woman said the air suddenly smelled like copper and ozone, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. Another reported hearing a sound like metal scraping against concrete, but rhythmic, almost like breathing. A third witness, who asked to remain anonymous, claimed he saw something following Marcus, something that looked like a person but moved in stop motion, appearing in one spot, then another without seeming to cross the space between. Marcus's apartment revealed more pieces of the puzzle. His laptop contained hundreds of files documenting his research into disappearances in the New York subway system dating back to its construction. He had identified a pattern. Every 3 to 7 years, someone would vanish from the same stretch of tunnels where he disappeared, always during the evening commute, always running into the darkness as if fleeing from something only they could see. The disappearances were typically attributed to mental health crises or accidents. But Marcus had found commonalities that officials had missed or ignored. Most disturbing was a series of photos Marcus had taken in the weeks before his disappearance. Using long exposure settings on his camera, he had captured images in various subway stations that showed anomalies, blurred figures that shouldn't have been there, faces in the shadows between pillars, and in one particularly unsettling image, what appeared to be dozens of hands pressed against the inside of a tunnel wall, as if something was trying to push through from the other side. Marcus had also been in contact with a former MTA maintenance worker named Joseph Rivera, who had quit his job abruptly in 2019 after 20 years of service. Rivera told Marcus about the places in the tunnel system that workers avoided, sections where the lights never worked properly, where tools would go missing, and where seasoned workers would hear voices calling their names from ventilation shafts. He spoke of an incident in 2018 where an entire work crew had fled a tunnel after encountering something they refused to describe, only saying that it wasn't supposed to be down there, and moved like it was made of smoke and teeth. 3 weeks after Marcus's disappearance, a transit worker performing routine maintenance in a section of abandoned tunnel near City Hall Station reported finding something unusual. It was a smartphone, later confirmed to be Marcus's, placed carefully on a ledge as if deliberately left there. The phone was still functional, though the screen was cracked in a spider web pattern. When investigators accessed it, they found a single video file created after Marcus's disappearance. The video, lasting 43 seconds, showed only darkness at first. Then a light, possibly from the phone's flash, illuminated a section of tunnel that didn't match any known part of the subway system. The walls were wrong, made of something that looked organic rather than concrete, pulsing slightly as if breathing. In the distance, barely visible, figures could be seen standing motionless, their proportions subtly wrong, too tall, joints bending in too many places. The audio captured a sound like whispers in a language that linguists couldn't identify, growing louder until suddenly the video cut off. The phone's GPS data for the time the video was recorded showed an impossible location, approximately 300 feet below the deepest part of the subway system, in solid bedrock where no tunnel should exist. Subsequent ground-penetrating radar scans of the area found anomalies, hollow spaces that shouldn't be there, but city officials refused to authorize excavation, citing structural concerns and budget constraints. Since Marcus's disappearance, 3 more people have vanished from the same stretch of the subway system. Each time, witnesses report similar phenomena: shadows that move wrong, sounds that don't belong, and an overwhelming feeling that something is hunting in the tunnels. The MTA has increased security and lighting in the affected stations, but maintenance workers still report equipment failures, unexplained sounds, and the persistent feeling of being watched. Late-night commuters passing through Canal Street Station sometimes report seeing a figure standing on the platform that vanishes when looked at directly. Others claim to hear someone calling for help from the tunnels, a voice that sounds like Marcus Webb but distorted, as if it's traveling from somewhere much farther away than just the darkness beyond the platform. The MTA officially denies these reports, but internal memos leaked online suggest they've created a special protocol for dealing with what they term anomalous passenger incidents in that section of the system. Marcus Webb remains missing, officially listed as a presumed accident victim. But those who've studied his research, who've seen the security footage and the video from his phone, know that he didn't fall or jump. He ran from something that the cameras barely caught, something that might still be down there in the dark, waiting just beyond the reach of the platform lights for the next person to notice it, to see it clearly enough to run, to follow Marcus into whatever lies beneath the city in those spaces that aren't supposed to exist. The school bus. Rural Route 49 in Nebraska is the kind of road that seems to go on forever, cutting through endless cornfields that stretch to the horizon in every direction, broken only by the occasional farmhouse or grain silo. It was along this lonely stretch of asphalt that School Bus 47 disappeared on the morning of September 18, 2020, taking with it driver Helen Morrison and 11 elementary school children whose fate remains one of the most disturbing mysteries in American history. Helen Morrison, 58 years old, had been driving the same route for 12 years without incident. She knew every pothole, every turn, every farmhouse along the 40-mile route that collected children from the isolated farms and delivered them to Plainfield Elementary School. She was known for never being late, for remembering every child's birthday, and for maintaining strict safety protocols. Parents trusted her completely, which made what happened that September morning all the more incomprehensible. The first sign something was wrong came at 8:15 a.m. when the school called parents to report that bus 47 hadn't arrived. This was unusual, but not immediately alarming, as mechanical problems occasionally caused delays. But when attempts to reach Helen on her cell phone and the bus's radio went unanswered, concern quickly turned to fear. Parents began driving the route, looking for any sign of the distinctive yellow bus. They found nothing. The search expanded rapidly. Law enforcement, volunteers, and eventually the National Guard scoured not just the bus route but hundreds of square miles of farmland. Helicopters crisscrossed the sky, searching for any sign of the vehicle. It seemed impossible that a full-size school bus could simply vanish from a flat landscape with clear sightlines for miles, but that's exactly what appeared to have happened. Then, at 4:47 p.m., 7 hours after it had disappeared, bus 47 was found. A farmer named Donald Garrett discovered it parked in his cornfield, 2 miles from Route 49, with no visible tire tracks showing how it had gotten there. The corn around the bus was undisturbed, standing tall and unbroken, as if the vehicle had been placed there from above. Garrett immediately called 911, and first responders rushed to the scene, hoping to find the children safe. The bus was empty. The doors were closed, the windows intact, the keys still in the ignition. Backpacks sat in seats, lunchboxes unopened, everything exactly as it should be during a normal morning route, except for the complete absence of any human presence. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no indication of where Helen and the children had gone. The investigation revealed deeply disturbing details. The bus's GPS tracker showed it following its normal route until 7:23 a.m., when it suddenly went offline. The last recorded position was a stretch of Route 49 between the Hendricks and Zhao farms, nowhere near where the bus was eventually found. Security footage from the Hendricks farm, which had a clear view of the road, showed the bus passing at 7:21 a.m., everything appearing normal. Helen was visible in the driver's seat, and shadows of children could be seen through the windows. At 7:23 a.m., the timestamp on the footage jumped, skipping exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. When it resumed, the road was empty. Inside the bus, investigators found something that wasn't immediately apparent but became the focus of intense scrutiny. On the ceiling, drawn in what appeared to be charcoal or ash, were symbols that didn't match any known language or writing system. They formed a pattern that seemed to shift depending on the viewing angle, creating an optical illusion that made some investigators physically ill to look at for too long. Similar symbols were later found on the undersides of the seats, drawn in the same material. Helen Morrison's cell phone was discovered under the driver's seat. It contained a series of photos taken between 7:20 a.m. and 7:23 a.m. that morning. The first showed the road ahead, normal and empty. The second, taken 30 seconds later, showed what appeared to be a dark cloud or mass hovering above the road. The third photo was completely black. The fourth and final photo, time-stamped at 7:23 a.m., showed the interior of the bus, but it was wrong. The perspective was impossible, as if taken from outside the bus looking in through solid metal. In the photo, Helen and the children were visible but frozen, like mannequins, their faces turned toward something outside the frame, expressions of identical, blank observation. Interviews with parents revealed troubling information about the children's behavior in the days leading up to the disappearance. Several children had reported the same recurring nightmare about floating above the cornfields, looking down at themselves from a great height. 3 children had drawn similar pictures in their classes, showing stick figures being pulled into the sky by dark shapes. One child, 7-year-old Emma Watson, had told her mother the morning of the disappearance that the collectors are coming today, but couldn't explain what she meant. The search for Helen and the children continued for months. Ground searches, aerial surveillance, and even satellite imagery were employed, but no trace was found. Then, in December, a disturbing development occurred. Farmers throughout the county began reporting strange formations in their fields, not crop circles but paths that seemed to lead nowhere, meandering trails that would appear overnight in snow or frost, always ending abruptly as if whatever made them had simply ceased to exist mid-step. On the 1-year anniversary of the disappearance, something extraordinary happened. At exactly 7:23 a.m., multiple witnesses reported seeing bus 47 driving along Route 49, exactly where it had vanished. Drivers who saw it said it appeared solid and real, Helen visible at the wheel, children's faces in the windows. But when they looked back or tried to follow, the bus was gone. These sightings have continued, always at the same time, always in the same location, always lasting just seconds before the bus vanishes like a mirage. A former NASA physicist who analyzed the case theorized that the bus and its occupants had been subjected to some kind of dimensional displacement, shifted slightly out of phase with our reality. He pointed to the GPS anomaly, the security footage skip, and the impossible photographs as evidence of a localized space-time distortion. His theory was dismissed by law enforcement, but it gained traction online among those trying to make sense of the impossible. In 2022, a woman claiming to be Helen Morrison called a late-night radio show. The voice sounded like Helen, according to those who knew her, but aged and exhausted. She said only, "We're still on the bus. We've always been on the bus. The road doesn't end. The children don't cry anymore. They understand now. We all understand. When you see us, don't follow. It's not a road you can come back from." The call was traced to a cell phone tower near Route 49, but no phone was ever found. The families of the missing children have formed a support group, meeting monthly to share their grief and hope. Some have reported dreams where their children visit them, always the same age as when they disappeared, telling them they're okay but can't come home yet. Others have found toys or drawings that weren't there before, items their children favored, appearing in their homes without explanation. Route 49 remains in use, though locals drive it quickly, especially in the early morning hours. School District 47 retired the bus number permanently, and no driver will take the same route Helen drove. On foggy mornings, when the corn is high and the visibility is low, drivers report seeing shapes in their peripheral vision, a flash of yellow that might be a school bus, shadows of small figures by the roadside that vanish when looked at directly. They speed up, eyes fixed straight ahead, radios turned up loud to drown out what some swear sounds like children singing, a song that seems to come from above and below simultaneously, from nowhere and everywhere, a song in a language that no one recognizes but everyone understands means they're still out there, somewhere, on a road that exists parallel to ours, always traveling, never arriving. The hotel room. The Grandview Hotel in downtown Portland, Oregon, was built in 1912, an elegant brick structure that had survived earthquakes, fires, and urban renewal to stand as one of the city's historic landmarks. It wasn't a luxury establishment anymore, having settled into a comfortable middle tier that attracted business travelers and tourists looking for character over amenities. Room 712 was nothing special, just another queen bed, a desk, a view of the parking garage next door. But after what happened to Jennifer Huang in November 2022, Room 712 would never be rented again. Jennifer was a 34-year-old pharmaceutical sales representative from San Francisco, in Portland for a 3-day conference. She was known for being methodical and precise, the kind of person who kept detailed expense reports and always called her husband David at the same time each evening when traveling. She had checked into the Grandview on November 14th, requesting a high floor away from the elevator, and been given room 712. The first sign something was wrong came on November 15th, when Jennifer didn't show up for her morning presentation at the conference. Her colleagues called her phone, which rang but went unanswered. Hotel security was asked to check on her, and the desk clerk accompanied them to room 712 with a master key. They knocked repeatedly, announced themselves, then entered to find the room empty but strange. The bed was stripped completely, not just unmade, but the mattress was bare, with the sheets, blankets, and pillows stacked in the corner in a perfect pyramid. Jennifer's suitcase was open on the desk, her clothes folded with obsessive precision, each item aligned exactly with the edges of the surface. But Jennifer herself was gone. Her phone was on the nightstand, still charging, along with her wallet, keys, and conference badge. The bathroom showed signs of use, a wet towel hanging on the hook, toothbrush by the sink, but the mirror was covered with condensation as if from a hot shower, despite being cold to the touch. Most disturbing was what they found on the walls. Hundreds of tiny marks, like tally marks, carved into the paint with something sharp, covering every wall from floor to ceiling except for a perfect circle about 3 feet in diameter on the wall opposite the bed, which remained untouched. Security footage told a bizarre story. Jennifer was seen entering her room at 9:43 p.m. on November 14th after dinner with colleagues. The hallway camera showed no one entering or leaving room 712 after that. But the timestamp on the footage jumped from 3:33 a.m. to 4:44 a.m., a gap of 71 minutes where the recording simply didn't exist. When it resumed, the door to room 712 was standing open, though no one was visible in the hallway. The door remained open until housekeeping discovered it the next morning. The investigation deepened when Jennifer's husband David provided disturbing information. In their phone call the evening she disappeared, Jennifer had seemed distracted and anxious. She told him the room felt wrong, that the dimensions seemed off, like the walls were closer than they should be. She mentioned hearing someone in the room next door repeatedly saying her name, but when she called the front desk, she was told both adjoining rooms were vacant. She had considered changing rooms, but didn't want to seem difficult. Police interviewed other guests on the 7th floor. Several reported unusual experiences that night. A businessman in room 710 said he heard what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor above him, but there was no 8th floor in that part of the hotel. A couple in room 714 reported their television turning on by itself repeatedly, always to static, and claimed they could see faces in the white noise. The guest in room 709, directly next to Jennifer's room, checked out in the middle of the night, telling the night clerk only that the walls were too thin before leaving without requesting a refund. The tally marks on the walls were counted, 8,847 in total, far more than one person could make in a single night. Analysis showed they were made with Jennifer's fingernails, which were found embedded in the drywall in several places, but the pattern suggested something impossible. The marks started at normal height but extended to the ceiling, 14 feet up, with no furniture that could have been used to reach that height. Some marks appeared to be inside the wall, visible through the paint but carved into deeper layers that shouldn't have been accessible without demolition. Jennifer's laptop revealed she had been researching the hotel's history in the hours before her disappearance. She had found newspaper articles about previous incidents in room 712 that the hotel had never publicized. In 1978, a traveling salesman named Robert Cole had been found in the room in a catatonic state, repeating the same phrase over and over. The door opens inward. He never recovered his sanity. In 1993, a Japanese tourist named Yuki Yamamoto had barricaded herself in the room, calling the front desk 17 times to report that the room was getting smaller. When security broke down the door, they found the room empty, Yamamoto's clothes laid out on the bed as if she had simply evaporated out of them. Most disturbing was an incident from 1952 that Jennifer had found in archived police records. A family of 4, the Marshalls, had stayed in room 712. The parents were found the next morning in a state of shock, unable to speak, while their two children, ages 8 and 10, were never found. The parents later claimed the children had been folded into the walls, but could never explain what they meant. They spent the rest of their lives in psychiatric care. 3 days after Jennifer's disappearance, a housekeeper cleaning room 415, 3 floors below 712, made a shocking discovery. Behind a loose panel in the closet, she found Jennifer's conference badge and one of her shoes. The room had been occupied continuously since before Jennifer's arrival, with no explanation for how her belongings could have gotten there. The shoes showed signs of extreme wear, as if it had been walked in for years rather than days. A week later, Jennifer's husband received a voicemail from her phone number. The message was mostly static, but enhanced audio analysis revealed what might have been Jennifer's voice, distorted and echoing, saying, "The walls aren't walls. The door doesn't go where it should. I can see all the rooms at once now. Don't come looking. The hotel doesn't want to let anyone go." The call had somehow been placed 3 days before Jennifer had even checked into the hotel, according to phone records. The Grandview Hotel management sealed room 712 permanently, but problems began spreading to adjacent rooms. Guests reported walls that seemed to pulse like breathing, doorways that led to the wrong hallways, and the persistent feeling of being watched from inside the walls themselves. An architectural survey found that room 712 shouldn't exist according to the building's original blueprints. The space it occupied was supposed to be solid structure, support beams and ventilation shafts, not a guest room. An urban explorer who illegally accessed room 712 in 2023 posted a video online before disappearing himself. The footage showed the room had changed. It was larger than it should be, extending impossibly far back, with multiple doors that hadn't been there before. The tally marks had grown, now covering the ceiling and floor, and in the center of the untouched circle on the wall, a new mark had appeared, a perfect outline of a human hand, too large to be normal, with too many fingers. The explorer's camera captured his reflection in the covered mirror, but behind him stood figures that weren't in the room, shadows of people including what looked like Jennifer, all standing still, all staring at something beyond the frame. The Grandview Hotel closed in 2024, officially for renovations. But workers refused to enter the 7th floor, and the city has received numerous complaints about sounds coming from the abandoned building at night, sounds like hundreds of people whispering the same words over and over. Check out, check in, never leave. Jennifer Huang remains missing, her name added to a growing list of people who have vanished from room 712, a room that according to physics and architecture shouldn't exist but continues to hunger for occupants, waiting behind its door that opens inward, into spaces that maps and blueprints insist aren't there. The birthday party. The Riverside Park in Austin, Texas, is the kind of place where families gather every weekend for birthdays, barbecues, and celebrations. With its sprawling oak trees, well-maintained playgrounds, and pavilions perfect for parties, it had hosted thousands of children's birthdays over the decades without incident. That changed on March 22, 2021, when 8-year-old Timothy Chen's birthday party became the site of one of the most disturbing mass disappearances in American history. Timothy's mother, Grace Chen, had planned the party for weeks. 23 children from Timothy's 3rd grade class were invited, along with their parents, for an afternoon of games, cake, and fun. The party started at 2 p.m. under the reserved pavilion, with colorful decorations, a bounce house, and a magician hired to entertain the children. By all accounts, it was a perfect spring day, warm but not hot, with clear skies and a gentle breeze. At 3:15 p.m., the magician was performing his final trick, an elaborate illusion involving a large box decorated to look like a castle. He called Timothy and 7 of his closest friends to assist him: Emma Martinez, Lucas Johnson, Aisha Patel, Oliver Kim, Sophia Rodriguez, Nathan Black, and Zoe Williams. The children giggled as they climbed into the box one by one, the magician making jokes about sending them to a magical kingdom. Parents watched and filmed on their phones as the magician closed the box with a flourish, tapped it 3 times with his wand, and spoke the magic words, "Transportius totalius." The plan was simple. The children would slip out through a hidden panel in the back, while the magician distracted the audience, then reappear from behind the crowd for the big reveal. But when the magician opened the box with a dramatic gesture, it was empty, just as planned. He waited for the children to appear from behind the crowd. They never did. The hidden panel at the back of the box was still closed and locked from the inside. The area behind the box, clearly visible to several parents, showed no sign of the children. Initial confusion turned to concern, then to panic as parents began searching the immediate area, calling their children's names. The magician, a 60-year-old professional named Howard Finch who had been performing for 30 years, was visibly shaken, insisting this had never happened before, that the trick was simple misdirection with no real magic involved. Within minutes, the park was swarming with police. The entire area was cordoned off, and a massive search began. Every inch of the park was examined, the nearby river was dragged, and an Amber Alert was issued for 8 missing children. The FBI was called in, treating it as a potential mass kidnapping. But there was no ransom demand, no sign of struggle, no evidence the children had ever left the box. The investigation revealed deeply troubling details. Multiple parents' videos of the magic trick, when synchronized and analyzed, showed something impossible. In the moment the magician closed the box, all the videos showed the same anomaly, a brief distortion like heat shimmer that rippled outward from the box. The timestamp on every recording jumped forward by exactly 13 seconds, though no one present remembered losing time. In one video, shot from an angle that showed the interior of the box just before it closed, the children appeared to be looking at something above them, their faces reflecting a light source that didn't match the afternoon sun. Howard Finch, the magician, was thoroughly investigated and cleared of any involvement. His background was spotless. The box contained no secret compartments large enough to hide 8 children, and he was as mystified as everyone else. But under intensive questioning, he revealed something he hadn't initially mentioned. When he had arrived at the park that morning to set up, he found the box already assembled, though he was certain he had loaded it unassembled in his van. Inside the box, he found 8 small objects that looked like party favors, metallic and spiral-shaped, which he assumed were decorations someone had added. He had thrown them away, but investigators recovered them from the park's trash. The objects defied analysis, made from a material that didn't match any known element or alloy, and they emitted a faint electromagnetic field that caused nearby electronics to malfunction. Grace Chen, Timothy's mother, revealed that her son had been having nightmares for weeks before his birthday. He talked about the birthday children, kids who never got to finish their parties. He had drawn pictures of children floating in what he called the between place, a grey space full of balloons that never popped and candles that never went out. She had attributed it to excitement about his upcoming party, but now the drawings took on a sinister significance. In one drawing, dated a week before the party, Timothy had drawn 8 children in a box with the words, "We'll come back when the party ends," written in crayon. The other missing children's parents reported similar strange behaviors in the days leading up to the party. Emma Martinez had told her mother she was going to the forever party. Lucas Johnson had started collecting small objects, saying he needed to bring gifts for the other birthday kids. Aisha Patel had asked her father if it was possible to have a birthday that lasted forever, and seemed disappointed when he said no. These comments had seemed innocent at the time, but now suggested the children somehow knew something was going to happen. 3 days after the disappearance, something extraordinary occurred. At exactly 3:15 p.m., the same time the children had vanished, multiple families reported the same phenomenon. In their homes, they heard their missing children's voices, clear as day, singing "Happy Birthday." The song seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, lasting exactly 1 minute before fading away. Several families managed to record it, and audio analysis confirmed the voices matched the missing children, but they were singing in perfect unison, something they had never done before. Investigation into the park's history revealed a pattern that had been overlooked or dismissed. Every 7 years, dating back to 1979, a child had gone missing from a birthday party at Riverside Park. Never multiple children, always just one, always during the celebration, always without explanation. The cases had been treated as isolated incidents, runaways or isolated abductions, but when mapped together, they formed a disturbing pattern. Each disappearance had occurred at the same pavilion, at approximately the same time of day, and in each case, witnesses reported strange anomalies, time discrepancies, electronic malfunctions, and the persistent smell of birthday candles even when none were lit. A week after the disappearance, a groundskeeper at the park made a horrifying discovery. In a maintenance shed that had been locked and unused for years, he found decorations from multiple birthday parties spanning decades. Banners with names of missing children, including some from the historical disappearances, photographs that shouldn't exist showing the missing children at ages they never reached, and most disturbingly, a birthday cake that appeared fresh despite being for a child who had disappeared in 1979. The cake had 9 candles, still burning with flames that gave off no heat and couldn't be extinguished. Parents began reporting shared dreams, vivid nightmares where they were in a vast grey space filled with endless birthday parties. In these dreams, they could see their children, always 8 years old, always celebrating, always just out of reach. The children seemed happy but wrong, their smiles too wide, their laughter echoing from too many directions. In every dream, the children would notice their parents and wave, calling out, "We can't leave until the party's over," but the party never ends. A theoretical physicist from the University of Texas proposed that the children had been pulled into a pocket dimension, a fold in space-time created by the repeated emotional energy of celebrations in the same location. He suggested that birthdays, with their focus on marking the passage of time, might create weak points in reality that, under the right conditions, could open into parallel spaces. His theory was widely dismissed by authorities, but gained traction among desperate parents seeking any explanation. On Timothy Chen's 9th birthday, exactly 1 year after the disappearance, Grace Chen held a small memorial at home. At 3:15 p.m., as she lit a single candle on a cake, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Timothy's name, though his phone had been in the magic box with him when he vanished. When she answered, she heard her son's voice, unchanged, still 8 years old. "Mom, we're okay. We're at the best party ever. Every day is someone's birthday here. We get cake for every meal. The magician says we can come home when we're ready to grow up, but nobody ever wants to. Tell Dad I love him. I have to go. It's time for Pin the Tail on the donkey again." The line went dead. The phone company had no record of the call. The magic box used in the trick was destroyed by authorities, but workers reported that as it burned, they could hear children laughing inside it. The ashes, when tested, showed traces of the same unknown material as the spiral objects found inside. Howard Finch retired from magic, claiming he could still hear the children sometimes, applauding tricks he never got to finish. He died 6 months later, and his last words were reportedly, "They're still clapping." Riverside Park remains open, but the pavilion where the party took place is avoided by locals. Families who do use it report hearing "Happy Birthday" sung by invisible voices, finding wrapped presents that weren't there before, and occasionally, impossibly, seeing their own children playing with 8 kids who shouldn't be there, children who never age, who never tire, who never stop celebrating a birthday that stretches on forever in a place between seconds, where time stopped at 3:15 p.m. on a perfect spring day when a magician's trick worked too well and 8 children found the one birthday party that would never, ever end. The camping trip. The Blackwood National Forest in Northern California spans over 2 million acres of dense woodland, hidden valleys, and mountain peaks that scrape the sky. It was here, in a designated camping area known as Whisper Creek, that the Morrison family set up their tent on July 4, 2018, for what should have been a peaceful holiday weekend in nature. Instead, their camping trip would become one of the most disturbing disappearances ever recorded, not because of what was lost, but because of what was left behind. James and Patricia Morrison, both teachers from Sacramento, had brought their 3 children, 16-year-old Ashley, 14-year-old Tyler, and 11-year-old Emma. They were experienced campers who followed all safety protocols, checked in with rangers, and chose a well-established campsite near other families. The afternoon of July 4th was spent hiking, roasting marshmallows, and watching fireworks from a nearby town light up the distant sky. Several other camping families remembered seeing them, describing a perfectly normal, happy family enjoying the outdoors. At approximately 2:30 a.m. on July 5th, something happened that defied all logical explanation. A couple camping 3 sites over, the Johnsons, were awakened by what they described as a sound like fabric tearing, but amplified, as if the very air was being ripped apart. This was followed by complete silence, not the normal quiet of night, but an absolute absence of sound that made their ears ring. When morning came and the Morrisons' dog, a golden retriever named Max, was found wandering between campsites whimpering and refusing to go near the Morrisons' tent, other campers went to check on the family. What they found inside the tent has never been adequately explained. The sleeping bags were all occupied, but not by the Morrison family. Instead, each sleeping bag contained what investigators would later describe as biological impressions, perfect indentations in the fabric as if bodies were still lying there, warm to the touch, but completely invisible. The impressions moved slightly, rising and falling as if breathing, but nothing could be seen or felt above them. Personal items, glasses, phones, a book Ashley had been reading, were suspended in mid-air exactly where they would be if the family was still there, holding them. Park rangers immediately evacuated the campground and called in federal authorities. The FBI's forensic team documented something that challenged their understanding of physical reality. Thermal imaging showed 5 human-shaped heat signatures in the exact positions where the family should have been, in their sleeping bags, and one sitting in a camp chair outside. The heat signatures had normal human temperatures and showed movement consistent with breathing and occasional shifting. But in the visible spectrum, infrared and ultraviolet, nothing was there. The family was somehow present but not present, existing in a state that science couldn't explain. Even more disturbing was what happened when investigators tried to interact with the space where the family should have been. Agent Sarah Coleman reached out to touch one of the heat signatures and reported feeling resistance, like pressing against warm glass. She heard, or thought she heard, a voice saying, "Help us." But the sound came from inside her head rather than through her ears. When she pulled her hand back, her palm bore 5 small marks, like fingerprints burned into her skin, as if someone had grabbed her hand from the other side of whatever barrier separated them. The family's phones, still suspended in air where invisible hands held them, showed ongoing activity. Text messages appeared on screens, typed by unseen fingers. Ashley's phone showed her trying to message her best friend. "Something happened, we're here, but not here, can't make you see us, please help." Tyler's phone had opened a note app where words appeared. "The forest took us, but didn't take us, we're between the trees and the sky." Emma's tablet was playing a game, the controls moving by themselves, her game character running in circles as if controlled by increasingly frantic invisible hands. Analysis of the campsite revealed anomalies that defied known physics. The ground inside a perfect circle encompassing the Morrisons' tent showed molecular changes, as if the basic structure of matter had been altered. Plants within this circle grew differently, their cells showing DNA mutations that shouldn't have been possible. Most disturbing, photographs taken of the area showed shadowy figures in the backgrounds that weren't visible to the naked eye. 5 human shapes that appeared to be screaming. Other campers from that night came forward with disturbing accounts. The Chen family reported that their 8-year-old son had woken up at exactly 2:30 a.m., pointing at the Morrisons' tent and saying, "The people are going sideways." When asked what he meant, he said, "They're going into the spaces between seconds, where the forest keeps its secrets." The boy had no memory of saying this, and became distressed when shown video his parents had taken of his statement. Investigation into the forest's history revealed that Whisper Creek had long been considered a place of power by indigenous peoples. The local Native American tribe, when approached, reluctantly shared legends of the Hollow Ones, beings that existed partially in our world and partially in another, who could pull people into the between spaces, where they would exist forever without truly existing at all. They said the barrier was thinnest during celebrations, when human joy and noise disturbed ancient things that preferred silence. 3 weeks after the disappearance, something changed. The heat signatures began to fade, the invisible breathing became shallower, and the suspended objects started to lower slowly to the ground. Patricia Morrison's journal, which had been floating in mid-air, fell open to a page where new words were appearing, written by an invisible hand. "We can see you, but you can't see us. We're fading into the between. The children are scared. Time moves differently here. Every second is a year, is a moment, is forever. The forest is hungry. It feeds on presence, not flesh. We're becoming part of it. Remember us as we were, not as we aren't." The writing stopped mid-sentence. The heat signatures disappeared completely over the course of an hour, fading like cooling embers. The suspended objects fell to the ground. The only evidence the family had been there at all were the impressions in the sleeping bags, which remained for exactly 7 days before those two vanished, leaving behind only empty fabric and the lingering sense that somewhere, in spaces human eyes couldn't perceive, the Morrison family was still screaming for help that would never come. The campsite was permanently closed, but hikers in the area report strange phenomena: voices calling from empty spaces, footprints that appear in real time with no one making them, and occasionally, on quiet nights, the sound of a family laughing around a campfire that isn't there. One photographer captured an image that shows 5 shadows around a non-existent fire, shadows cast by nothing, reaching towards something that exists in the spaces our eyes refuse to see. The train passenger. The overnight train from Chicago to Seattle, known as the Empire Builder, travels through some of the most remote territory in America, crossing plains, mountains, and forests where cell phone signals disappear and the darkness outside the windows seems infinite. It was on this route, on October 15, 2019, that 25-year-old medical student Rebecca Chan boarded Car 4, Compartment B, for what should have been a scenic 46-hour journey to visit her sister. She never arrived, and what happened to her remains one of Amtrak's most closely guarded secrets. Rebecca had texted her sister from Union Station, sending a selfie in front of the train and expressing excitement about having 2 days to study for her upcoming exams without interruption. She boarded at 2:15 p.m., and several passengers remembered seeing her settle into her compartment with a backpack full of medical textbooks and her laptop. Her compartment was in the middle of the car, between an elderly couple heading to Montana and a businessman traveling to Minneapolis. The first sign something was wrong came during the night, somewhere in rural Wisconsin. The elderly couple, the Hendersons, reported hearing Rebecca's voice through the thin wall separating their compartments. She seemed to be having a conversation, but they could only hear her side of it. She kept saying, "That's not possible," and "You can't be here." They assumed she was on the phone, though cell service was non-existent in that area. The conversation continued for hours, growing increasingly agitated, until suddenly cutting off at exactly 3:33 a.m. When the conductor came through for morning tickets, Rebecca didn't answer her compartment door. This wasn't immediately concerning, as passengers often slept late, but when she didn't respond to repeated knocks for lunch service, the conductor used his master key to check on her. The compartment was empty. Not just empty of Rebecca, but empty of everything. Her luggage, her books, her laptop, even the bedding from the fold-down bunk was gone. The compartment looked as if it had never been occupied, despite multiple witnesses seeing her board and settle in. The train was searched from engine to caboose while stopped at a station in North Dakota. Every compartment, every bathroom, every storage area was checked. The train's manifest confirmed Rebecca had boarded. Her ticket had been scanned, but there was no record of her leaving. Security footage from the train's cameras showed something that made investigators question their own eyes. Rebecca was seen entering her compartment at 2:47 p.m. The next footage of the corridor, from 2:48 p.m., showed her compartment door still closed, but through the small window in the door, the compartment appeared to be empty, as if she had vanished within that single minute. But the truly disturbing footage came from 3:33 a.m. The camera showed Rebecca's compartment door opening, but instead of opening outward into the corridor as it should, it appeared to open inward, into darkness that didn't match the lit interior of the compartment. A figure emerged that looked like Rebecca but moved wrong, each step slightly out of sync with reality, as if she was walking through thick liquid. This figure walked down the corridor toward the camera, and as it passed directly underneath, the image distorted. For exactly one frame, the figure appeared to have too many limbs, as if multiple versions of Rebecca were occupying the same space. Then the footage cut to static for 13 seconds. When it resumed, the corridor was empty, and Rebecca's compartment door was closed. The businessman in the adjacent compartment, David Park, came forward with disturbing information. He claimed that around midnight, he had heard Rebecca talking to someone in her compartment, but the other voice was wrong. He described it as sounding like multiple people speaking in unison, their words slightly offset, creating an echo effect. He heard them say, "You're traveling through spaces you shouldn't see. Every mile takes you further from your world and closer to ours." He had assumed it was a horror movie or podcast until he heard Rebecca respond with genuine terror in her voice. Investigation of Rebecca's compartment revealed anomalies that defied explanation. The walls showed signs of extreme electromagnetic distortion, as if exposed to forces that don't naturally occur. The window glass had microscopic cracks in perfect spiral patterns that physicists said shouldn't be possible without temperatures approaching absolute zero. Most disturbing, when investigators used luminol, they found handprints covering every surface of the compartment, hundreds of them, all matching Rebecca's prints, but in positions that suggested she had been trying to climb the walls, possibly trying to escape something. Rebecca's laptop was found 3 days later, but not on the train. It appeared in her apartment in Chicago, on her desk, open to a document she had been typing. The document consisted of a single paragraph repeated hundreds of times. The train moves through more than space. Between the clicks of the rails are doorways. They ride with us, have always ridden with us, in the spaces between cars, in the rhythm of the wheels. I can see the real passengers now. We're the intrusion. This is their track, their journey. When the train passes through the dark places, they collect their fare. The Empire Builder continued its route after the investigation, but crew members reported ongoing strangeness in Car 4. Compartment B, passengers placed in that compartment often checked out early, reporting nightmares about trains that traveled vertically, through ground and sky simultaneously. Several reported seeing a woman matching Rebecca's description standing in the compartment, but when they blinked, she was gone. One passenger photographed what they thought was their own reflection in the compartment window, only to discover upon review that the reflection showed someone else entirely, a young woman with Rebecca's face but eyes that reflected like a nocturnal animal's. 3 months after Rebecca's disappearance, her sister received a voicemail from Rebecca's number. The message was mostly static, but enhanced audio revealed Rebecca's voice, distorted and multiplied as if several versions of her were speaking simultaneously. "Still traveling. Can't get off. The train never stops in the places between. Tell Mom I love her. Don't take the train. Any train. They all pass through the same spaces eventually. I can see every track at once now. Every passenger who ever disappeared. We're all still riding, just on different rails, in different directions, in the spaces between the click-click-click of the wheels." The phone company insisted the call was impossible. Rebecca's phone had been in her compartment when she vanished and was never recovered. Yet the call's metadata showed it originated from coordinates that placed it simultaneously in multiple locations along the Empire Builder route, as if the call had been made from a train traveling all possible paths at once. The Mirror Store. The Reflection Emporium in downtown Boston was one of those quirky specialty shops that shouldn't have survived the age of online shopping, yet somehow thrived for 43 years selling nothing but mirrors. Antique mirrors, modern mirrors, handcrafted mirrors from around the world. Owner Theodore Glassman had collected them all in his 3-story Victorian building on Salem Street. It was here, on November 30th, 2020, that 31-year-old interior designer Sarah Martinez walked in looking for a statement piece for a client's mansion and became the 13th person to vanish inside the store since its opening in 1977. Sarah was known for her meticulous attention to detail and her habit of documenting everything for her social media followers. She had live-streamed her arrival at the store, showing the elaborate window display of antique mirrors reflecting infinitely into each other. Her last post, uploaded at 2:17 p.m., showed her standing in front of a massive ornate mirror on the store's 3rd floor, captioning it, "This one's perfect, but something's off about the reflection. Can you spot what's wrong?" Her followers would later realize with horror that her reflection in the mirror was facing the wrong direction, looking back over its shoulder at something not visible in the real store. Theodore Glassman, 78 years old and decidedly old-fashioned, didn't believe in security cameras, claiming they ruined the ambience of his carefully curated space. But he was in the store that day, working on restoration in the basement workshop. He reported hearing Sarah's footsteps on the 3rd floor, the distinctive click of her heels on the hardwood, for approximately an hour. Then, at 3:24 p.m., he heard what he described as the sound of glass singing, a harmonic resonance that made every mirror in the building vibrate simultaneously. When he climbed to the 3rd floor to investigate, Sarah was gone. Her purse was found on the floor in front of the ornate mirror she had photographed, its contents scattered as if dropped suddenly. Her phone was still recording, having captured 37 minutes of footage after her last post. The footage showed Sarah examining various mirrors, her reflection normal at first, then gradually becoming delayed, lagging behind her movements by fractions of seconds that grew longer with each mirror she passed. In the final minute of recording, Sarah could be heard saying, "Why are there more of me? That's not possible. You're not me. Stop copying me wrong." The phone then captured her scream, the sound of breaking glass despite no mirrors being broken, and then silence. The police investigation revealed the disturbing history of the Reflection Emporium that Theodore had carefully hidden. 12 people had vanished in the store over the decades, always on the 3rd floor, always near mirrors that Theodore claimed were part of his special collection. These mirrors, he reluctantly admitted, had been acquired from estate sales of people who had died under mysterious circumstances, many of whom had reported seeing things in mirrors that weren't there shortly before their deaths. Detective Robert Walsh, leading the investigation, discovered that the mirrors in the special collection were arranged in a specific pattern that created what optical physicists called a reflection trap, a configuration where light could theoretically bounce infinitely between surfaces, creating a space where the laws of optics broke down. But this didn't explain the disappearances until they found Theodore's father's journals in the building's basement. Ernst Glassman, Theodore's father and the store's founder, had been a physicist who fled Germany in the 1930s. His journals revealed an obsession with the concept of mirror dimensions, parallel worlds that existed on the other side of reflective surfaces. He believed that with the right arrangement of mirrors and specific harmonic frequencies, one could open doorways between our world and these reflection worlds. The store wasn't just a business. It was an experiment that had been running for over 4 decades. The journal's final entry, dated the day before Ernst's death in 1976, was chilling. "I've seen them, the mirror people. They look like us because they are us, or were us, or could have been us. Every choice we don't make, every path we don't take, creates a reflection. They want to trade places. They want our world because theirs is fading, becoming less real with each passing year. Theodore must continue the work. The barriers must be maintained, or they will all come through. When confronted with this information, Theodore broke down and admitted the truth. The store was both a trap and a barrier. The specific arrangement of mirrors kept the mirror people contained, but occasionally, someone would stand in exactly the wrong place at the wrong time, when the harmonic frequency was just right, and they would be pulled through. He had tried to prevent it by guiding customers away from dangerous spots, but Sarah had moved too quickly, explored too freely. To prove his claims, Theodore led investigators to a mirror in his basement workshop that he called the window. Looking into it showed the store's third floor, but wrong. The perspective was impossible, and moving figures could be seen. 12 people matching the descriptions of those who had vanished over the years, including Sarah. But they moved strangely, their actions slightly out of sync with each other, as if they existed in different layers of the same space. Sarah was there, pounding on the mirror from the other side, her mouth moving in screams that couldn't cross the barrier. Attempts to break the mirror and free those trapped failed catastrophically. When Detective Walsh struck the window with a crowbar, every mirror in the building exploded simultaneously, but instead of shattering outward, the fragments were pulled inward, disappearing into the frames. In the aftermath, Walsh reported seeing dozens of figures standing where the mirrors had been, translucent and flickering, all wearing faces that looked familiar but wrong. They stood for exactly 13 seconds before fading, but in that time, 3 more people in the building vanished, pulled into the spaces where the mirrors had been. The Reflection Emporium was condemned and scheduled for demolition, but the wrecking crew refused to enter after their foreman saw his reflection walk away from a surviving mirror while he was still standing in front of it. The building stands empty now, its windows boarded, its doors chained, but neighbors report seeing lights inside at night, and shadows moving past windows that should be covered. Some claim to have seen Sarah Martinez and the others pressed against the windows from the inside, their reflections on the outside of the glass, trying to break through from wherever mirrors really reflect. The cruise ship cabin. The Magnificent Seas was a mid-sized cruise ship that ran 7-day Caribbean routes out of Miami, carrying 3,000 passengers in relative luxury through tropical paradises. It was modern, well-maintained, and had an impeccable safety record until the voyage of April 15, 2021, when the entire population of Deck 7, Section C, 43 passengers and 12 crew members, vanished somewhere between Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, leaving behind a mystery that the cruise industry has desperately tried to suppress. The disappearance wasn't discovered until the morning of April 18th, when the ship was preparing to dock in Grand Cayman. Housekeeping reported that none of the 22 cabins in Section C had requested service for 2 days, and none of the passengers had been seen at meals or activities. Security was sent to investigate and found every cabin door in the section standing open, the rooms pristine but wrong. Personal belongings were arranged in perfect geometric patterns on the beds, clothes folded into impossible shapes that maintained their form despite defying physics, and every mirror in every bathroom was covered with condensation that wouldn't wipe away. Captain Eric Johansson immediately ordered the section sealed and began reviewing security footage. What he found challenged his 40 years of maritime experience. The footage from April 16th at 11:47 p.m. showed all 43 passengers and 12 crew members in the section's corridor, standing perfectly still, facing the same direction, toward the stern of the ship. They stood this way for exactly 4 minutes, not moving, apparently not even breathing, before simultaneously turning and walking into their respective cabins or service areas. That was the last time any of them were seen. The ship's data logs revealed anomalies during those 4 minutes. The GPS showed the ship in 3 different locations simultaneously, all thousands of miles apart, one in the Caribbean, one in the North Atlantic, and one in coordinates that placed it in the middle of the Sahara Desert. The ship's compass spun wildly, the electromagnetic interference was off the charts, and the water around Section C's hull registered temperatures of -40 degrees Celsius, impossible in the tropical Caribbean. When investigators entered the abandoned cabins, they found disturbing evidence. Every passenger had been writing in the final moments before they vanished. Some used pens on paper, others typed on laptops or phones, some even used lipstick on mirrors or fingernails on walls. But they all wrote variations of the same message. The ship beneath the ship is calling. We can hear our names in the rust and rivets. The ocean remembers every vessel that ever sank. They want us to join the eternal voyage. The crew that never lands. The passengers who never arrive. The crew members' quarters contained maintenance logs that didn't match any work scheduled on the ship. They described repairs to decks that didn't exist, references to passenger complaints from people who weren't on the manifest, and navigation charts for routes the magnificent seas had never taken. One engineer's notebook contained detailed schematics for parts of the ship that weren't in the original blueprints. Entire decks that should have been below the waterline but were described as being between the real decks, where the other passengers sail. In cabin 7023, belonging to a family of 4 from Toronto, investigators found something that defied explanation. A video camera had been recording when the family vanished, but the footage was impossible. It showed the family standing in their cabin, but the cabin extended infinitely backward, the walls stretching into darkness. Other figures could be seen in the distance, passengers in clothing from different eras, Victorian dresses, 1920s suits, military uniforms from various wars. The family walked toward these figures, growing smaller in the impossible distance until they vanished from view, though the cabin they walked through was only 15 feet deep. The ship's doctor, who had been on duty in the medical center on Deck 6, reported that at exactly 11:47 p.m. on April 16th, he had received simultaneous emergency calls from every cabin in Section C. But when he answered, he heard not voices but the sound of a ship's horn, the kind used on ocean liners from the early 1900s. The sound was so loud it caused his ears to bleed, and when it stopped, he realized 4 minutes had passed that he couldn't remember. Investigation into the ship's history revealed that Section C was built over the exact location where, in the original ship's design, there had been a chapel. The chapel was removed during construction due to budget constraints, but workers reported strange incidents during the modification. Tools that disappeared and reappeared in different locations, the sound of hymns when no one was singing, and one worker who claimed he saw passengers from another ship walking through the steel framework before the walls were installed. A maritime historian discovered that the coordinates where the magnificent seas had been during the disappearance corresponded exactly with the location where 5 different passenger vessels had sunk over the past 2 centuries, with a combined loss of over 800 lives. Each sinking had occurred during calm weather with no explanation, and survivors from 2 of the incidents reported seeing another ship that seemed to be sailing inside their vessel just before it went down. 3 weeks after the disappearance, something extraordinary happened. The families of the missing received postcards, all postmarked from different ports around the world on the same day. Each postcard showed the magnificent seas, but in the image, it appeared to be a much older vessel, its paint faded, its structure somehow both ancient and modern. The messages were all similar: still sailing, never arriving. The voyage between voyages continues. We see every ocean at once now. Don't look for us. We're traveling on the ship that sails through all ships. We are crew and passenger forever. The magnificent seas was quietly retired from service, sold for scrap, but the salvage crew reported that Section C couldn't be dismantled. The metal wouldn't cut, torches wouldn't burn through it, and when they tried to remove it in one piece, they found it was somehow fused to parts of the ship that didn't exist in the blueprints. It sits now in a salvage yard in India, that section still intact, and workers report hearing sounds from inside. Footsteps, laughter, the clink of glasses as if a party is in progress, and sometimes, on foggy nights, the sound of a horn from a ship that sank 100 years ago. The shopping mall. Westfield Shopping Center in suburban Detroit was built in 1987, a sprawling 2-story complex with all the standard features of American retail architecture. fluorescent lighting, music playing softly through hidden speakers, and the faint smell of cinnamon from the food court. It was here, during the Black Friday shopping rush of November 26, 2021, that 17-year-old Ashley Thompson walked into the maze of stores at 8:47 a.m. and became part of a phenomenon that would eventually lead to the mall's permanent closure. Ashley had gone shopping with her mother and younger sister, but they had separated at the mall entrance, planning to meet at the food court at noon. Security cameras captured Ashley entering through the main entrance, wearing a distinctive red jacket her grandmother had given her for her birthday. She was seen walking past the fountain, entering various stores, appearing completely normal. But at 10:23 a.m., something changed. The security footage from JCPenney showed Ashley browsing through clothing racks when she suddenly stopped, her head tilted as if listening to something. She then walked toward the back of the store, past the customer service desk, and through a door marked "Employees Only." The employee break room had no other exits, but when staff checked 30 seconds later after seeing her on camera, Ashley was gone. The room was empty except for the overwhelming smell of ozone and what employees described as the sound of distant carousel music, though the mall had no carousel. This should have been a straightforward missing person case, but Ashley's disappearance was the 17th in a pattern that mall management had been desperately trying to hide. Since 2019, 16 other people had vanished in similar circumstances, always during busy shopping periods, always last seen entering employee-only areas that had no other exits. The mall's corporate owners had suppressed the reports, attributing the disappearances to runaways or claiming the people had been found, but internal documents leaked by a whistleblower revealed the truth. The documents included incident reports that defied explanation. Security guards reported seeing shoppers in stores that were closed and locked. Maintenance workers found footprints on the ceiling of service corridors. The mall's power consumption was 40% higher than it should have been, as if it was powering areas that didn't officially exist. Most disturbing were the reports of echo shoppers, figures that looked exactly like real customers but were slightly transparent, walking through the mall in patterns that repeated every 43 minutes. When Ashley's mother, Linda Thompson, demanded answers, she was initially dismissed. But when she threatened to go to the media, mall management reluctantly shared their internal investigation. They had discovered that the mall was built on the site of a former psychiatric hospital that had burned down in 1952, killing 37 patients who had been locked in their rooms. But more disturbing was what they found in the architectural plans. The mall's layout, when viewed from above, formed a specific pattern that one consultant identified as a dimensional gateway symbol from obscure occult texts. The investigation intensified when other families of missing persons came forward with similar stories. Each missing person had reported feeling called to certain areas of the mall in the days before their disappearance. They described dreams of endless corridors lined with stores that didn't exist, where mannequins moved when no one was looking and escalators went up and down simultaneously. Several had drawn maps of these dream malls, and when overlapped, they formed a three-dimensional structure that couldn't exist in normal space, a mall that folded in on itself infinitely. A team of paranormal investigators was brought in secretly by the mall's insurance company. Using electromagnetic field detectors and thermal imaging, they discovered that the mall existed in what they called a dimensional overlap. In certain areas, particularly near the employee-only doors where people had vanished, reality was thinner. Their equipment detected the presence of additional space beyond the walls, not just hollow areas, but actual retail spaces that existed parallel to the real stores. The breakthrough came when a janitor named Marcus Wells came forward with video he had taken on his phone. Working late one night, he had seen Ashley Thompson and the other missing people walking through the mall, but they were walking through a different mall that seemed to exist in the same space, one with different stores, different lighting, where the shoppers were all people who had vanished over the years. He had tried to call out to them, but they couldn't see or hear him. They were shopping in what he called the mall between, going through the motions of normal shopping in a place that wasn't quite real. On December 15, 2021, something unprecedented happened. For exactly 13 minutes, starting at 1:13 p.m., the two malls merged. Shoppers reported seeing duplicate stores occupying the same space, feeling like they were in two places at once. Some saw loved ones who had vanished, just out of reach, separated by what looked like glass but felt like nothing at all. Security cameras captured impossible footage of the same people in multiple locations simultaneously, of stores that didn't exist appearing and disappearing, of Ashley Thompson and the others trying to run toward the real mall but being pulled back by invisible forces. During those 13 minutes, 3 more people vanished, but 2 people returned. Not recent disappearances, but a mother and child who had vanished in 2019. They had no memory of the missing time, insisting they had just been shopping normally, though they were wearing the same clothes they had disappeared in, now faded and worn as if aged by years. When shown calendars proving 2 years had passed, they became hysterical, claiming that couldn't be right. They had just been looking at toys, just been trying to find the exit, just been walking through stores that went on forever. The mall was evacuated and closed permanently on December 16, 2021. Demolition was attempted in January 2022, but had to be halted when workers reported that destroying walls in the real mall caused screams to echo from nowhere, and several workers saw people trapped inside the walls, not bodies, but living people shopping in spaces that shouldn't exist. The building stands empty now, its parking lot chained off, its windows covered with plywood that does nothing to hide the lights that still turn on every night at closing time, illuminating stores that were never built, where 17 people and counting continue their eternal Black Friday shopping in a mall that exists between the second hand and the minute hand of every clock that stopped at 10:23. The elevator shaft. The Hartley Building in downtown Philadelphia was a testament to 1920s architecture. 32 floors of Art Deco elegance that had been meticulously maintained for nearly a century. Its crown jewel was the express elevator in the north shaft, an original Otis that had been modernized with digital controls but retained its brass fixtures and hand-carved wooden panels. It was in this elevator, on February 8, 2022, that 9 people entered on the ground floor for what should have been a 40-second ride to the top. They never arrived, and what happened during those 40 seconds has never been explained. The group consisted of 6 lawyers from the firm on the 28th floor returning from lunch, 2 delivery men with packages for the 31st floor, and a building maintenance worker named Carlos Mendez who was heading to the roof to check the HVAC system. Security footage showed them entering the elevator at 1:17 p.m., the doors closing normally. The elevator's digital display showed it ascending 2, 3, 4. But it never stopped at any floor, never reached its destination, and when the doors were finally forced open on the 32nd floor after 17 minutes of no response, the elevator car was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. The packages the delivery men had been carrying, Carlos's tool bag, the lawyers' briefcases, even the brass fixtures and wooden panels that had been bolted to the walls for a century were gone. The elevator car was a bare metal box, its surfaces somehow scorched as if exposed to extreme heat, though the temperature sensors showed no anomaly. The security camera inside the elevator had melted into a puddle of plastic and metal that had resolved into a pattern that looked disturbingly like a screaming face. Building security immediately reviewed the footage from the hallway cameras on each floor. The elevator was seen passing each floor normally until the 13th floor, where something impossible happened. The footage showed the elevator continuing to ascend, but also descending at the same time, as if 2 elevators were occupying the same shaft. This visual anomaly continued for exactly 40 seconds, the elevator simultaneously going up and down, existing in multiple positions at once, before the footage cut to static on all cameras simultaneously. The building's elevator maintenance logs, all digital and supposedly tamper-proof, had been altered. New entries appeared dated years in the past, describing maintenance on floors that didn't exist. The 33rd through 45th floors of a building that only had 32. These entries described problems with passenger spillover and temporal shaft alignment, and referenced an incident in 1954 where an entire elevator car had departed from conventional space-time with 17 passengers who were never found. Research into the building's history revealed that the north elevator shaft had been the site of numerous incidents over the decades. In 1932, an elevator operator named Thomas Bright reported that the car had traveled sideways through darkness for several minutes before returning to normal operation. In 1967, four businessmen claimed the elevator had taken them to a floor that was between the fourth and fifth, where they saw an office that belonged to a company that had gone out of business in 1929, complete with workers in period clothing who didn't seem to see them. In 1988, a janitor named Maria Santos quit after claiming she had seen faces pressing against the inside of the elevator shaft, faces of people who had ridden the elevator years before. The investigation took a disturbing turn when Carlos Mendez's wife provided his work journal. Carlos had been documenting strange occurrences in the building for months. He wrote about hearing voices in the elevator shafts during maintenance, voices that seemed to come from above the 32nd floor. He had measured the shaft and found it was 17 feet longer than it should be based on the building's height. Most disturbing was his entry from the week before his disappearance. The elevator knows where it's supposed to go. Sometimes it takes people there anyway. The building wants to be taller. It remembers when it was supposed to be 45 floors before the Depression changed the plans. Those floors still exist somewhere, and the elevator still serves them. 3 days after the disappearance, something extraordinary happened. At exactly 1:17 p.m., the time the group had entered the elevator, every phone in the building rang simultaneously. When answered, employees heard the same thing. Distant voices, echoing as if from a great height, saying they were stuck between floors, that the elevator kept going up but never arrived, that they could see all the floors at once, existing in the same space but different times. The calls lasted exactly 40 seconds before cutting off. A physicist consultant brought in by the insurance company proposed that the elevator shaft acted as a vertical tunnel through space-time, where the movement of the car under specific conditions could create a rupture in dimensional barriers. He pointed to the building's construction, which incorporated unusual amounts of quartz in its foundation and frame, materials that could theoretically amplify electromagnetic fields. Combined with the elevator's constant movement over decades, it had worn thin the barriers between dimensions. On February 15th, exactly 1 week after the disappearance, security cameras throughout the building captured something that shouldn't have been possible. The missing 9 people were seen simultaneously on every floor, standing in hallways, visible for just a moment before vanishing. But they weren't standing. They were oriented as if still in the elevator, sideways or upside down relative to normal gravity, trying to exit through doors that weren't there. In the footage from the 32nd floor, Carlos Mendez could be seen pounding on what appeared to be solid air, his mouth forming the words "wrong floor" over and over. The building's owners made the decision to seal the north elevator shaft permanently, filling it with concrete. But during the pour, workers reported that the concrete wasn't filling the shaft properly. It was disappearing, as if falling into spaces that shouldn't exist. After pumping in 3 times the amount needed to fill the shaft, they gave up. The shaft was sealed at top and bottom, but what exists in between remains unknown. Tenants began reporting strange phenomena throughout the building. The sound of elevator bells from the sealed shaft. The feeling of the building swaying as if it were taller than it actually was. Several reported seeing elevator doors that weren't there before, doors that opened onto impossible vistas, offices from different eras, floors that extended infinitely in all directions, and sometimes glimpses of the 9 missing people, still riding an elevator that never stops, through a building that exists in more dimensions than architecture should allow. The Hartley building was evacuated and condemned in April 2022 after a structural engineer detected that the building was somehow growing. Not visibly, but measurements showed it was becoming taller without adding floors, as if stretching into a dimension that couldn't be seen. The final measurement before evacuation showed the building was 33 feet taller than its visible height, exactly the height of one additional floor that existed somewhere else, where 9 people remained trapped in an elevator that's still traveling, still climbing toward floors that were never built but somehow still exist.